There's no sound. The mic's not on in the boardroom. The boardroom's muted.
Looks like it's unmuted now.
How's this, Shar? Okay.
All right, there we go.
Okay, as you'll see, Trustee Rosen Asher is appearing by video virtual, and Trustee Rosenberg is excused from today's meeting. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance on this Flag Day? So, I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. Our first item on the agenda is a proclamation that I am thrilled to make today for Marie and Arch McKellar. So I will come down and make the presentation. Trustee Sullivan, if you'd like to join me, certainly invited. So. So it's my honor today, let's put this here, I guess. To read and make this proclamation to the McKellars, who've been such an integral part of our village. They've done so much for us, and we're so appreciative for what you've done for us. This is just a small token of what we can give to you for all your efforts and your dedication to our village. And I know Trustee Sullivan has been working very closely with you, and she was integral in making sure that we honored you as we should. So, you have anything you would like to add before I read the proclamation?
Not really. I really do appreciate, like, it will be said in the proclamation, but the efforts that you guys have given to the village. You're left a lifelong lasting impact that generations to come will enjoy, and we couldn't thank you enough for that.
So I saved the best part for the bottom part of this proclamation, so I will read the beginning part. Whereas volunteer community service is an integral part of the operations and spirit of the village of Dobbs Ferry, and we honor those who generously give their time and talents to improve our community. And whereas in 2008, the McKellars made a substantial donation to the village to ensure that the waterfront park improvement project would move forward, and they established the waterfront committee. And whereas the McKellars initiated the Friends of the Dobbs Ferry Waterfront and have diligently pushed to have the park maintained at the level that it should be. And whereas the Friends, with significant contributions from the McKellars, have made additional donations for projects to trim back trees in the village, paid for an arborist to produce a training video on tree care, planted trees at Waterfront Park, and other projects that improve the Dobbs Ferry community. And whereas McKellar Cove is dedicated to Marie and Arch McKellar for their inspiration, generous donation, and steadfast dedication that made possible the renewal and enhancement of Dobbs Ferry Waterfront Park. Whereas the village of Dobbs Ferry appreciates and respects the McKellars for their commitment and contribution to the village, and is sincerely grateful for all they have donated to the village. I officially commend and thank the McKellars for their generosity and dedicated service to the citizens of Dobbs Ferry, and resolve through the authority of my office, I do hereby proclaim that Wednesday, June 15th, 2022 is Marie and Arch McKellar Day in the village of Dobbs Ferry, and direct that this proclamation be carried throughout the village for people of goodwill to see and know. So thank you so much.
you all, thanks to the mayor and to all of the trustees and all the people in the village of Dobbs Ferry. I really appreciate this, especially Nicole, who's been working with us so closely. We moved here in 2001, Arch and I did, and we were told that they've been trying to get the park renovated since the 60s, but there was not the money or the will, political will to do it. And so in 2001, we came and Charlene Payton had this great presentation of what she was going to do, great walking trails. I thought, this is great. And I waited and I waited and I waited until 2007. I figured Charlene was no longer here. It wasn't going to get done. So we made a proposal to the village at that point, Arch and I did. And the village liked it. And so then a committee was formed with Steve Hunter, Steve Tilley, Elizabeth Martin, and of course, David Koenigsberg here and Arch and myself and a few others. And we met monthly for over 7 years. And people couldn't believe that we met that long, but we really did. Then we formed, when the park finally opened in 2015, we formed the Friends of the Dobbs Ferry Waterfront Park, a 501c3 corporation. I have been president and Arch was treasurer. And now we fortunately have terrific people to take over. David Koenigsberg is going to be our new treasurer, and Jean Cronin Cessalini and Catherine Slocum are going to be our co-presidents. And they have been out there planting and weeding, and everything you see in Willow Point, most of it is what we've done. We've added all sorts of trees, and Jean is out there, and many of the people are. We have lots of people out there, volunteers, weeding and planting new plants. And this is done with a lot of volunteer labor and money that has been donated to the park. This is not on Dobbs Ferry taxpayers. It's all on private donations and volunteer labor. And by the way, when the park was finally opened up in 2015, we ended up under budget with actually a slight surplus. So it worked out. And Arch and I have just been very happy that we've been able to provide something that will help all of the residents, actually all the residents of New York State, but primarily of Dobbs Ferry. So I hope you enjoy it for many, many years to come. Thank you for this proclamation.
I think it's easier up here, isn't
It'll
it?
be, I think it'd come out better if we're up there.
Yeah.
Meeting over.
Meeting over, right? Taking over everything here.
Okay, so let's move on to the next action item, which is an appointment. And tonight we're going to appoint someone to be the village fire inspector. So we have a resolution before us, and I'm just going to read it. Well, is there a motion to appoint Russell Maitland as village fire inspector? Trustee Taylor, second. Trustee Patino, and I just want to read it. Resolved that Russell Maitland be appointed to the village of fire position of fire inspector in the village's building department effective June 20th, 2022. Be it further resolved that the salary for this position shall be $77,107 annually, and be it further resolved that upon this appointment as fire inspector, Russell Maitland shall be subject to a mandatory probationary period of up to 52 weeks pursuant to the civil service rule. All in favor?
I had it up. It doesn't take that long.
Passes unanimous. Welcome, Russell. Public hearing. Our first public hearing will be a public hearing on a local law to establish accessory dwelling units. Is there a motion to open this public hearing? Trustee Casal, second. Trustee Sullivan, all in favor? And the public hearing is now open. Melissa, do you want to, or Laura Lee, do you want to take the lead on this?
Sure, and we also have our planner here.
I will get to, where is she?
Valerie
Where is she?
and I collaborated on getting this local law prepared, and you were all certainly involved in terms of the discussions. If you recall, your former interim administrator brought forth this idea of adding this. He used as the basis the Irvington Code provisions, and then we have developed a customized approach to the addition of the use of accessory dwellings. And you can see what the stated reasoning for this would be: to provide a larger diversity of housing options, and specifically to accommodate your seniors to stay in, to live in place and not be subject to the whims of the real estate market and the tenancies. And also to encourage young people to as a starting out place, to start here in order to incubate them to be property owners and to remain as residents also. So Valerie is here, and she can speak to the law in a broader sense. There is a model law that's being proposed and as an option by the county. We've incorporated a number of aspects of the county code in here as well. And with your comments, we now have developed this into a draft for your consideration at a hearing.
Hey, Valerie, do you want to come on up and talk a little bit about the law? And also maybe you can talk about, I know we had to send this to Westchester County. We did get some comments back from the county. Then you can comment about their comments.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the law itself will be applied to your OF districts, which is your one family districts. I think the law itself is structured so that you would have, it's a special permit process. It specifically will allow for accessory dwelling units to be built on site. It could be new construction, or it could be actual alterations of existing dwellings. It can be within the accessory dwelling unit, can be within the primary house itself, or it could be in a separate house on site as well. So the other thing I just want to highlight, for expirations, the expirations is really when you have a change in ownership, and the process itself would not require additional parking to be provided on site. Basically, we're trying to make, or I think the village board tried to make this as flexible as possible, and to be as accommodating as possible to allow for these accessory dwelling units to be included within the village. The county comments, basically they applauded the village for moving forward with the accessory dwelling units law. They had a couple of comments, and one dealt with considering the village should consider an alternative approach of permitting and regulating accessory apartments as a permitted use in single family zoning districts as opposed to a special permit mechanism. I think one of the things that the village of Westchester County is unaware of is the village of Dobbs Ferry does have a number of requirements that will put a particular application, such as the accessory dwelling units, towards the planning board for site plan approval, or potentially at the Architectural Historic Review Board also for approvals. So when we looked at the special permit process, we took into consideration, one, that the planning board does look at applications that deal with excavation or filling involving more than 300 cubic feet of earth, or disturbance of more than 2,000 square feet of land. And the Architectural and Historic Review Boards also look at construction, reconstruction, or exterior alterations of any structure. So because of that, the approval process would be pretty much simultaneous along with the special permit approval process, because the special permit approvals also have to go to the planning board. If the board decided to remove the special permit approval process, it wouldn't necessarily create a more efficient process, because the applicant would still need to appear before the planning board or the AHRB. And as this board knows, you're also discussing about potentially combining the functions of the planning board and AHRB. So basically, at the end of the day, there's going to be one board that an applicant would have to appear before in order to get the special permit approval as well as the site plan approval to do the accessory dwelling units. If the board decided to not move forward with the special permit process, you're going to want to work into your zoning code some of the special permit requirements as automatic requirements that are necessary in order to include that accessory dwelling unit, mostly because of the fact that you are actually allowing for the construction of new accessory dwelling units on site, as opposed to just rehabilitating, or excuse me, including the accessory dwelling units within existing principal buildings. So that's the first comment. And is there any questions on that?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment on it, is because I've discussed it with you and I've discussed it with our attorney as well, that the special permit makes it go to the planning board, which then allows for a little more transparency in the whole process as well. So.
Right, that's correct as well. But like I said before, if for some reason you were to remove the special permit process, they would still have to appear before the planning board for site plan approval or.
But not if they were doing
review.
an internal.
Right, no, that's the thing. I think the assumption was that it would potentially be an internal review. There are some communities that do not have site plan approval for single family houses in terms of new construction or additions, right? So I think the assumption was that, this could potentially just be an administrative thing, removing the site plan, special use permit, but in fact, it's going to be just as efficient of having the special permit process, because it does require the additional approvals from the planning board and AHRB. The second comment from the county dealt with the cap on the number of apartments permitted. I think the village chose to do 50 apartments as the cap, just as an initial, beginning process. If the village decides to remove that cap, that's completely fine. We had many discussions that we didn't think that would, we would even get to that point. So it's up to the board if you want to keep the cap in of 50 dwelling units or remove the cap. If you keep the cap in at 50 dwelling units, you can always change it later on down the line too. So that's, again, really up to the board on that particular issue. And then the last comment they made was recommended against using subjective criteria such as impacts to the character of the neighborhood as a means to refuse accessory dwelling unit approval. And in actuality, the text reads a little bit more than that. They're referring to, the text actually says, the addition of an accessory dwelling unit shall now adversely affect the character of the neighborhood in which it is located. In applying this requirement, the planning board shall consider the effect of the proposed accessory dwelling unit on parking, traffic, noise, congestion, appearance, and any other factor that the planning board reasonably deems relevant to the character of the neighborhood. The planning board may refuse to issue a special permit if it finds that the cumulative effects from the approved accessory dwelling units in the neighborhood, including the one proposed, will adversely affect the character of the neighborhood. So it's not just the one unit. It would be a cumulative effect that would be taking place within the neighborhood, and at which point the planning board can make its findings that adding another one to that particular neighborhood or into that situation would have a deleterious effect on the character of the neighborhood. So it's not just, you can just deny it based on the character of the neighborhood, but there is actually certain findings that would need to be made.
Thank you, Val. Thank you for now.
You're
Don't
welcome.
go too far, I'm sure we'll go.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, the general municipal law requires your referral for these recommendations and comments from the county planning. They're not mandatory. The revisions you make are not mandatory based upon these recommendations. However, if you would choose to act adverse to any of the 3 comments and recommendations as revealed here, you would need a majority +1 to vote the law, to adopt the law.
Okay, that's good to know. Before we move forward, I have to, wait, it's public hearing, but before we move forward, I want to acknowledge emails that we have received regarding this. So I just want to state that we did receive an email from Ally Moss dated June 8th, 2022. We received an email from Jessica Cecil dated June 8th, 2022. An email from Catherine Slocum dated June 8th, 2022. An email from Rebecca Pitts dated June 10th, 2022. An email from Matt Laban dated June 10th, 2022. An email from Tracy Fish on behalf of the Dobbs Ferry Democratic Committee on June 12th, 2022. An email from Veri Bergenick dated June 10th, 2022. And an email from the Senior Advocacy Committee dated June 13th, 2022. An email from Janet Rosef dated June 14th, 2022. And an email from Vic Golio as well. So this is a public hearing, but I'd like to hear from people who have, God bless you,
Bless you. Thank you.
who have spent time on it. So Rob Lane, can you come up and talk about what your findings are?
I'm Rob Lane, 228 Judson Avenue, Dobbs Ferry. I was actually gonna hold my comments until I heard what the public had to say, but I guess I just want to make, rather than going through all these individual talking points which you have, I think there are 2 big misconceptions that I want to kind of clear up about this. The first has to do with scale and the scale of impact that we're likely to see here. Remember, this is only a plan. I'm saying this because I've had people come up to me who are not in single family districts and asking me about this. This only applies in the OF single family zones. Those zones, the ones that are the denser zones, where there would be the most anxiety about additions, parking, and so on. These are the zones that are like OF 4, 5, and 6. Per the comment that Dan made earlier, most of those properties are actually built out already in terms of coverage. In other words, the ability, somehow this idea that all of a sudden, like mushrooms, these things are going to be popping up in these neighborhoods, it's just not real. The underlying regulations in these districts does not change here. This doesn't allow you any more square footage or capacity or coverage than you have already. So, and I think that because, based on the experience of our neighbors, including Hastings, because of the cost of construction, I think you are going to see, I'll be surprised if there is a single separate detached building that's built, since it's limited to 800 square feet. And given the cost of construction in Westchester, I think we're really just not going to see very much of that kind of building. I mean, I think we have to learn from our neighbors here. Hastings has the same 50 unit max that we have. I was actually under the misimpression that they had never gotten up to 30, something like 30. I thought they'd had 30. My most recent conversations with Tom Spire and Hastings, he has 22, and it's dropping. It's dropping because people who are moving to Hastings, and I'm suspecting it's the same thing in Dobbs and Irvington, are wealthy enough that they actually want that space back. The accessory unit space is actually now space that they want to use for themselves. So Hastings is actually trying to figure out how to facilitate the creation of even more ADU units. How can we make this even easier for people to do? So this is going to have really because of the scale of it. And the other interesting thing is we were talking about concentration in the neighborhoods, again, learning from our neighbors. Hastings, if you look at a map of where these things have been built, it's basically buckshot. these things don't tend to suddenly be concentrated in particular neighborhoods, whether those neighborhoods are dense or not dense. They're all over the place. So there's not going to be, I think, the scenario in which the planning board would be confronted with a new ADU in a place where there was already 5 ADUs on the street. It's just not going to happen. When an ADU comes before us, it's going to have to go through the same planning process that every other project does, which means that we're going to have to consider these issues of its kind of visual impact and parking. Parking is going to be one of the things that we look at as part of our site plan review. And if a place is particularly, we go to see a place and it is particularly congested in terms of parking, then we're going to insist on an off-street that person accommodate another off-street space for that unit. So I think there's this one idea about just the scale of it. Irvington, by the way, who also adopted law, I think they have 3 of them in the village. I'll be surprised if we see 10 or I don't even know if we're going to see that many get built. And when they do get built, they're going to be scattered around the town. So I think that there's a scale issue here. But maybe a bigger issue is, who is this for? And I think people have correctly pointed out that this is not affordable housing, capital A, capital H, that is deed restricted and has to be affirmatively marketed to other populations besides people in Dobbs Ferry. This is for the people of Dobbs Ferry. It's for the fire inspector that you just sounded like a nice salary. I doubt he can live in Dobbs Ferry, afford to live in Dobbs Ferry. It's for teachers. It's for the people that are in the service industries who live in our village, who have to create traffic because they have to drive to teach in Dobbs Ferry and they have to drive from someplace 40 miles north of here. So that's who it's for. That's who it can help. And also for families, people that want to stay in Dobbs Ferry, but they can no longer afford to keep their house, and they have a way of having a little bit of supplemental income in order to make it possible for them to stay there. Or, as was pointed out, for young families, the children of families that have been here and want to stay here and their kids want to stay here. That kind of accessory dwelling unit is a great transition to that. So I think that's all I would say for now until we hear some of the comments, and I'm happy to answer particular questions.
Anybody from the public want to speak? Sure, come on up. Just when you come up, please say your name, your address, and please limit yourself to 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening. Klaus Whitney, Summit Terrace. I just have a couple questions I want to understand. When I read this, I guess, sort of draft resolution, I want to understand something here. Under purpose, they're listed A through E, and B and C clearly state that it should meet the needs of an underserved, especially single person, couples of ages of low and moderate income, and relatives of existing Dobbs Ferry residents, I assume that's what it means. Provide economic support for resident individuals and families, particularly homeowners who benefit from rental income and those of moderate means for whom there are limited housing options. The question I have, is this part of the criteria for you to determine if somebody's going to get the permitting or not? Meaning that somebody's going to sit there and say, well, I believe this person has proven they're of moderate income and they qualify.
No.
But why is it stated as a purpose?
Which is one of the purposes of having this, but no one's
Okay.
going to, if you're a renter, you're not going to come to the Board of Planning Board or the Board of Trustees and say, I want to rent from this person and this is my qualifications. That's not the way this works.
Okay, just why I don't understand why it's in there, because
That's the purpose of the law,
Well-
is to help single people or families. That's the purpose of the law, but it's not, we're not saying an applicant who wants to be a tenant must apply to the planning board and say, these are the reasons why I want to be a tenant. That's nothing to do with us, who the landlord wants to rent to. That's nothing to do with this.
okay, so if, say, a person of what good means wants his mother to move in, and next door somebody who's of moderate income wants to do this, there will be no decision based on, well, this person.
That's
okay.
correct.
When you
You
say-
can build,
I
you
take
can
that
build a
this is what I
$4 million
thought.
ADU for, well, you wouldn't do that for your mother-in-law, but for your, maybe for someone else. Or you can build a $40,000 ADU and rent it, and there is no restriction whatsoever on what rent you want to charge or how much you can spend on building that unit.
It
It is simply, this is the intent of the law, is to promote certain elements like the ones listed, but it is not a constraint of the law. You are not required to meet and either of those criteria.
I think that should be in there because first time I read this, that's the way I took it.
Well, we
This-
don't believe so, and it's not necessary in order to meet
Fine.
those.
I'm just telling what the public, from the public's point of view.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
The other question I had for you, what I, in my opinion, believe is not fair, that if that is not the case and a person of well means rents this out as an auxiliary unit, gets the income, does some slight modifications, there's no tax increase. They make the income, more garbage, more services from the town. How is that fair?
I think it's
You're
possible
thinking-
to envision scenarios that are not in line with what precedent shows. And I think the example that of the reduction in ADUs for more valuable properties, like some of the examples that Mr. Lane brought up from Hastings, are, in fact, that's what's happening. Right? It's not, folks who have enough money to not need a rental are not creating them in that way. It's just not it's not that it can't happen, it could happen. But I don't think we should limit all the good that can do for one potential and unlikely scenario that could run counter to the intention of the law.
Let me just say, I don't think the owner of means is going to have an additional unit and then rent it out to make money, because there's a lot of other ways that person can make money than just to charge $1,500 or $2,000 a month for, I think, for a rental for a unit on his property. So you have to think of it as from the tenant. We are now creating a housing unit where a tenant, whether it be a single person or an elderly person, can rent something that's affordable so they could stay in the community. Someone who owns a big piece of property is not going to, I don't think, will say, you know what, I can make money. This is a good way to invest it by building out an apartment building on my property. So it's the tenant that's getting the benefit of this.
And you also keep in mind, the size of these units are restricted. So you're not going to have a huge amount of people moving into an ADU. It can't be any larger than 800 square feet. That's the maximum. It can be smaller. It can't be any more than 2 bedrooms, and it can be a studio or it can be a 1 bedroom. So it's not something that is going to create a large influx into somebody's house.
Okay, but when you said up to 2 bedrooms, I envision a couple with a child, 2 additional cars, maybe. Again, if you go back and say, oh no, they are moderate means, they can't afford a car, we can speculate, but we just said we're not talking in that direction.
And if there is a parking issue in the neighborhood where where the unit is being proposed, the planning board will have the right to say, hey, you've got to provide an off-street parking space because it's a negative impact on the community.
I mean, the problem is that in the back roads that we have, they're already too small, right? I mean, the roads were built years ago. We don't have the 24 feet that we require now. So I see an issue there, but let me just make one comment. My feeling is the problem is the housing problem is brought by the high taxes that we have here. This kind of ADU units is very successful where I used to live down in Silver Spring, Maryland, to the point that everybody has one because you pay what, $2,000, $3,000 in taxes down there. But there's so many of those units that when I go visit my friends from the old days, you can't find a parking spot anymore. There are hundreds of garbage cans that line the street. That's the opposite when it's really quote unquote working. Okay, the problem here, and on what we heard here from the gentleman about not being successful, is really our taxes, which have gone up again tremendously. That's what's driving this, and we all know that. Now, this might be a Band-Aid and might be a few things, but in the end, this is not going to help out. I believe it's the entire way that we're taxed here for the services and so on. I mean, it's incredible. Even people of moderate income, like myself, or upper middle income, let's call it that way, it's finding it unaffordable to live here, to the point that I am speaking to my wife about saying we will have to move because I cannot continue living here. Okay, so anyway, I'd like for you to just, I would like to see these statements taken out because I think I can misconstrue it. It sounds like somebody's gonna make decisions based on income and what kind of family moving in to make these decisions. I would hate to see that. And I don't even know if that's legal. Thank you.
Bob Radomski, Ogden Avenue. I agree with everything that man just said. It doesn't make a lot of sense to put more cars on a block like that. What are we gonna do? Have no more 1S zoning? It's gonna be two-family? We've made couple of big mistakes. The one big one we made in Rochambeau. Those were supposed to be affordable housing and they were supposed to be sold back at that price. You gave those people $100,000 or more by doing what you did.
What did we do?
We didn't have it closed enough loopholes where they sold it for the going rate now.
Right, so
They
that
were
was like-
supposed to
that
be
was like
sold
40
back.
Years ago. So when we
I
say we-
understand that, but
Right,
we should
okay.
learn from our
Right,
mistakes.
we do learn from our mistakes. So how is this similar to that?
Excuse me?
How is this law similar? to
I
that?
don't know, but we better make sure this doesn't happen like that again and have a two-family house being sold where there was a one-family house. I don't know how you're gonna fix
doesn't
this,
change
but I don't
one
believe
family
it. We should be
resident,
doing
one family
this.
zones to two family.
I'm not against mom and pop moving in with you. That, I'm no young guy myself. Who knows where I'm gonna end up in a couple of years? But that's not the point. Once they're gone, how do we know who's moving in there? Like he said, we're gonna have people coming in here with a family, and now you have a two-family house in a 1S zone. Look, I don't know, I haven't followed this too much, but you better make sure what you're doing.
Okay.
Please.
That's the purpose of tonight, to hear what everyone has to say. You had something? Come on up.
I'm Nancy Generale at Summit Terrace. I just have two questions. I understand about keeping people in Dobbs Ferry, and I would assume a big chunk of them are the seniors who are finding it difficult to pay the taxes. But if they build the ADU, whether it's detached or part of their house, I'm assuming Greenberg will come in and reassess the homes and possibly raise their taxes. That's right. So we're capped at 10,000 with the SALT deduction, am I correct? So they'll have the income that's coming in, but then their property taxes might go up. And if they have the enhanced star, you have a limit on the income that you can have per year in order to be eligible for the enhanced star. Have any of you taken a look at?
So those are all reasons why maybe the people in number in Hastings has dropped, right? Because maybe for those reasons,
Okay.
they say it's not worth it.
All right, but I was looking to see if there was any literature out there in other states that might have done this, but I really couldn't find much going on. The other thing is,
AARP has a whole thing on
the
it.
ARP,
Yeah.
okay, I'll take a look. I even looked at the California, which they just redid theirs in 2020, I believe, with ADUs. I also looked at the New York Assembly bill, the A4854, which is modeled after California 2020. And in it, the New York bill basically states that it could be up to 1,500 square feet. So my question is, if the New York bill passes, does that override our conditions?
I believe if we do ours first, I think I've read
The New
that.
York one did not pass, though. The New
Right.
York one did
No,
not
I
pass.
know it hasn't. passed.
Westchester County, right, Westchester County is, if you look at the different areas in Westchester County, most all of them are pretty consistent with the 800 square feet as the,
Okay.
as
No, I
the
just wanna
maximum.
make
So
sure.
this has come up in almost every municipality in Westchester.
So basically, if it passes before the New York.
I don't want to swear to that, but I think.
But that
we
is
can
the
check that,
assumption.
yeah.
Well, the New York law did not pass during this
No,
session.
no, I know it
so they
hasn't
would-
passed.
Yeah, they're
It's
back to
actually
the
going
drawing.
to come back up again in late summer.
But that
So-
law would also require municipalities to do this.
Okay, no, that I understand, but I just want to make sure that our 800 square feet limit wouldn't disappear, is
That's
what
a
I'm
good
trying to
question,
say.
and I don't know how it will be
They-
drafted, but.
They did amend it over the the course of the committee discussions
Right.
to be more accommodating to the local preferences.
That's what I
So
thought.
I believe the reason it didn't pass is it was mandating zoning
Right.
on a state level, which has failed in many courts.
Okay.
Um,
And one of the other points on the New York one was that the owner could actually live in the ADU and rent out the house, the primary, and after a year, the owner does not have to live on the
No, so
property.
we discussed that here, right? So we
Okay.
discussed that. We want the owner to be on premise.
Okay.
And when a house is sold, the permit is not sold with it. The new owner has to
Reapply.
reapply.
Oh, I'm sorry. I happen to live on Summit Terrace with that gentleman, and there have been two major construction projects, and we live in a really narrow uphill street. And it's been really difficult to get in and out. So if you have additional people parking, it's just going to create even more chaos, especially during the winter months. I
And
just,
that's why it's going to the planning board.
And Mayor, we might be more efficient if we take all the questions and then, we'll answer the questions at the end.
Oh, okay.
It might
Well,
be
we'll
better
see.
than a back and forth, but it's really up to you how you would like to
My
proceed.
question is not on housing at all.
Then you want to, can you just wait until we finish with the housing?
Sure, absolutely.
Come on up.
Hi, good evening. I'm Nina Orville. I live at 235 Palisade Avenue, and I just want to share my support for this proposed regulation. There are so many people who I speak with in Dobbs Ferry who are either leaving the village or contemplating leaving the village because their circumstances have changed. And the proposed ADU legislation obviously isn't going to address all of those circumstances, but it will make it easier for some people, including seniors, to remain here in the village. And it's able to serve that purpose without, in my view, having a major impact on the footprint of the village. So I'm very much in support of what you're considering.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I would,
Yeah.
I would just mention to Nina's point about seniors, that one of the emails that we got in support of ADUs was from the Senior Advocacy Committee for exactly the reasons that Nina cited.
Hi all, my name is Yair Rosenkrantz, 120 Belden, and I'm also in support of this motion of ADUs. One thing that I would like to mention is also sustainable. It helps not only seniors, affordability. Affordability is not affordable housing, keeps generations in place, less movement, more density. And yes, there are all the mechanisms that we have to in place, like boards, planning board, zoning boards, architectural review boards that will make sure that everything is in compliance with the character of the neighborhood. So that's what I say.
Thank you. Come on up. Is there anybody who's raised their hand online who wants to speak? Okay. Be patient. We'll get to you.
Hi, Laura Hout, 191 Broadway, Dobbs Ferry. A lot of my questions have been answered. The one thing I was curious about is if someone was to get the ADU in their dwelling and then they sell their home, who monitors, like if they live in that home, the new owners have the home, they rent out the ADU, who kind of like monitors that if they decide to move out and then they rent the house and the ADU? I mean, is that legal?
No.
So how do we know?
Because the permit is granted only for as long as they live there. So when they no longer live there, the new owner will have to apply for the permit to maintain the ADU.
Okay.
And Mayor, also, I just want to remind the public that upon a transaction, a sale transaction, the building department goes in for an inspection for continuing CO. A CCO is required for every transfer of property in the village.
So the village will know when the property is being transferred.
Correct. Okay, thank you. And the other question I just had was, as Rob had mentioned, that, there aren't 50 ADUs, but how long is that period of time? Is it forever that the village,
Stage, there will never, with this law, there won't be more than 50 ever.
ever? Okay, that was my other question.
But that
At one
could
time,
change,
yeah.
right?
At one time.
Okay,
At one time.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
First, I want to really thank you guys for getting involved in this. I think we started talking about this in 2002. We actually came very, very close in 2010 to actually having it in the code that was adopted at that time.
Tell us who you are, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Patty Steinschneider, 329 Broadway, Dobbs Ferry, New York. Sorry about that. So yeah, this has been something that's been before us for a long time, and I think it's very important. I want to thank Valerie for doing all the hard work, putting all this together. I know that's not easy, but she's also had great support from several different task forces in the village, which I think is really encouraging that we've got people in the village that are thinking this way. One part of this that I think it hasn't really been mentioned yet, but it's integral to it. It's not called out in any particular way. It doesn't need to be, but it's primary to part of the intent here is that we already have a significant number of ADUs in Dobbs. They're just not recognized as legal. And often you're talking about the widow Jane or someone who's living in their home and able to live in the home because they're getting this additional income. And I don't think even our toughest building inspectors have a tough time going in and saying, we're going to have to throw these people out and you're going to have all these economic hardships. The challenge in that is that if you're not inspecting those because you're trying to be, considerate of widow Jane's situation, you also aren't then making sure that the life safety is being followed. So the opportunity of bringing this into something that's permitted and allowed enables us to be, have the jurisdiction to inspect and make sure they're safe and fix them if they're not. I think we might be surprised of how many people in some of the parts of town that are already 1 or 2 family homes legally have that second or third unit in it. And I think that's my second point in this is I really believe that this should be OF and the MDR1. If you have a 2-family, there are many 2-family zones in the village with houses that look like they're almost designed intentionally to have the 1 and 2 apartments on the upper 2 levels, and then they have a full above grade basement that has a separate entrance that happens to be an additional dwelling unit. That we should be getting those under the jurisdiction of the building department and legalized. And right now, this would not allow us to do that because that would still have to be an illegal one because it's in the MDR 1 zoning district. The issue with special permits, the only problem I have with it is that it's a term that has a long history. And special permits are often have all kinds of conditions and issues and everything else. I agree that it should be a special permit process, but maybe that can be softened a bit if it actually is just a referral. You have to get a permit for an accessory dwelling unit. And it's just, it's one of the things that the building inspector does. And anytime you're doing anything in Dobbs, you're going to the planning board anyway. So if you're under that review, it's accomplishing its task without making it appear in something as you as an attorney. I mean, there's a whole section about special permits and all these kinds of things. So I think that makes it a little bit, more complicated sounding than it needs to be. In terms of the size, I'm not really sure what the minimum or maximum on this should be. I think the maximum of 800 is too small. I think there are many basement apartments that are just going to naturally be closer to 1,000 or 100 square feet more than that. I think it's something, and you do have the wording in here that the planning board has the ability to allow it to be bigger. I think it should just be something that is soft in that being the limit. Obviously, the 2-bedroom limit is the important one. And New York State has laws, the building code in New York State limits how many people can live in a 2-bedroom apartment. So it accomplishes the goal by that. Let's see. On page 3, under 300-39-2H, the balance of that paragraph I'm fine with. I would just take out the first sentence. The addition of an accessory dwelling shall not adversely affect the character of the neighborhood in which it is located. that gives it a little bit too much like some of the concerns that you've heard tonight. People coming in saying, well, I don't want it because it's going to change the character of my neighborhood. We've seen that happen in other places. That should not be a criteria in this. And the rest of the paragraph covers the planning board's responsibilities and how to do it. So I just think that first one is not necessary. I think you also want to reserve for yourselves, because I think we're going into a transition over the next 10 to 20 years. That's going to be, interesting. And I think it would be nice if the Board of Trustees, if at some point they felt that the number should be increased from 50, because it's working very well, that you'd include in this the right for the Board of Trustees to do that. You'd have a process, but it wouldn't be as onerous as changing the laws. You'd do it by the same way when you're changing fees or something like that. You'd have it within your jurisdiction to do that if you felt it was appropriate. I think I'm
Patty,
almost
you're
done.
approaching 6 minutes, Patty.
I'm sorry, I'm a very slow talker. And again, this is very much under the jurisdiction of the building department. And I think they've got all the skills and talents and abilities to take care of most of what the concerns expressed have been. The last thing is the taxes. And when I went to the meeting in Hastings, I had always been against this thing of having to renew. They have this automatic renewal you have to do every number of years. I found out at the meeting, the reason they did that is that if you have a renewal process obligatory, it means that it's not a permanent improvement to your property, which limits the ability of the tax agency to impose additional taxes because of it. I think we should give some thought to that. And if that's what it is, it could be very simple. And the main thing is any complaints that the building department would get, that would trigger somebody coming back for renewal, would have to go back to the planning board and answer it. Otherwise, the building inspector would be able to just issue the extension of the permit without a hassle. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else here? Okay, let's, whatever other people online.
Can we see yourselves? Hi, this is Greg Barton and Janet Sigricka from 22 South Lawn. There's been a lot of discussion that one of the purposes of this is to enable particularly seniors who might have a difficult time staying in the neighborhood due to the tax impact, to give them an ability to stay in their homes by renting out, raising rental income. But what's been missing in all this discussions is the fact that they're going to be externalizing a lot of the burdens. And one of the gentlemen mentioned this in terms of, sewage and waste pickup. I'm more thinking about the schools. If we had 50 permits, there could be up to a couple dozen additional heads put into the Dobbs Ferry School District, which at over $30,000 a head, and 1,500 students could raise school taxes by another 2% with this initial 50. And if the program expands, it can keep going up. And all the benefits of the rental income go to those who are renting these units, and all the additional costs of supporting the additional needs for the residents of those units will go to the rest of the community and it's not only the seniors that are suffering from high taxes. I think the entire village is suffering from high taxes. And I'm wondering, it would seem if Greenberg could capture through an increased assessment the increased value of the properties that have these limited number of special permits, that would be great. But it sounds from some of the other commentary that, that might not be the case due to the way these things are structured. So I'm wondering what consideration there is for the impact on the rest of the community who is not one of the 50 people, up to 50 special permits, the increase on their taxes and how that is going to be kind of measured and taken into account.
It's good you brought up schools because as we all know, the school taxes are the bulk of our tax dollars. But fortunately, we were given a document prepared by Mr. Lane And one of the questions at the end is, will ADUs lead to overcrowding in schools? So I'm just going to read from it because I think it's relevant here. He starts off with a no, period. The proposed ordinance would limit ADUs in Dobbs Ferry to no more than 800 square feet, the size of an average one-bedroom apartment. And while this can be 2 bedrooms, that's 800 square feet, as Mr. Steinscheiner earlier pointed out, is a bit small for a 2-bedroom. Demographic studies commissioned by the Dobbs Ferry School District indicate that new market rate 1-bedroom apartments will have a student yield multiplier of 0.112 per unit, meaning that for Dobbs Ferry, if it reaches 50 ADU limit, it would result in 5 children for our school. So, well, again, these are broad-based statistics. Could the number be higher or lower? Yes, it could, but I think the impact is relatively small given the size of the ADUs and what that means for people with children.
It's just one follow-up, if I could. I certainly agree that the 800 square foot 2-bedroom limitation provides kind of a natural check to the ability of it to increase too dramatically. But certainly the desirability of the Dobbs school district makes it a magnet for people who wish to come up here to have their children get good education, quote, free. And it very well could be the case that you could find in even a very small 2-bedroom apartment, one of those bedrooms occupied by a couple of kids. And that's why I was saying if you had 50, I wouldn't think you would have like 100 additional students, but you could very well have more than 5. And I would expect, quite frankly, that you would have more than 5. And I'm wondering what mechanism the village would have in place to determine how the impact of these ADUs is resulting in additional burdens to the village budget, whether it's school or any other services, so that we can appropriately assess the impact on the rest of the community who are picking up the additional costs for the persons who have the permits, who are getting all of the benefits from it.
Well, certainly if we would hear from the school district that there was an overrun of students in the school system, we would then reevaluate the law. It's certainly to be reevaluated. Thank you. Is there anybody else?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sonia Turjanian, 43 Belden Avenue. I'd like to just speak to this issue from the perspective of historic preservation. Demolition and new construction don't happen because builders and investors are against historic preservation. It happens because of a mathematical calculation. Higher density buildings maximize their return on investment. And when there's a housing shortage, it's hard for towns and villages to argue against demolition and development, especially when there's a perception that we can demolish and build our way out of the climate crisis. The truth is, our time window for sequestering carbon and bringing down emissions is too small to make demolition and new construction viable. It costs more carbon to throw away the embodied energy in old buildings and transport newly manufactured materials than we can make up in the time that we have. So am I saying that we need to preserve old neighborhoods in amber? No. Am I saying we need to prevent change? No. I'm saying we need to manage change. We need to find ways to increase housing availability through slow, balanced growth. Slow, balanced growth keeps housing costs down and helps people stay in their homes. And slow, balanced growth maintains neighborhood character and vibrancy, and it's better for the climate. So I am 100% in favor of ADUs, and I thank those of you who have worked to make this happen. I think it's a smart, reasonable middle ground between uncontrolled demolition and development and the so-called, NIMBY attitude that a lot of preservationists and environmentalists are often accused of. So I just want to say yes, in my backyard, please. Thank you.
How many more are there?
3 more.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello,
Hello?
hello, can you hear me?
Can.
Okay, hi, it's Vicky Jones, 50.
Yep. Are you still there, Vicky?
She muted herself. One sec. Vicky, you muted yourself.
No, I didn't push any button.
Hear you now,
I
Vicky, so
pushed.
go ahead. Let's hear you.
Okay, Vicky Jones, 55 Grandview Avenue, Dobbs Ferry, New York. Dobbs Ferry has a very unique blend of housing units already. We have more people living in our community, almost double that of Hastings and Irvington. We have a very diverse a group of homes. We have single family home, multifamily homes. We have a very limited inventory, in my opinion, of single family homes. And it's the single family homes that are making people move out of Manhattan and want to buy in our community. It's not really people of my age that want to live in Dobbs Ferry and age out. And quite honestly, as much as I love you all, being 65 years old, I don't want to take on a second mortgage to put on an ADU on the backside of my house and have to worry about the tenants living in my backyard and everything else that has to be. My golden years, if I was to stay in Dobbs Ferry, certainly would not be with a tenant living with me. I have seen many of these accessory dwelling units that are non-compliant within our community. And I think it far exceeds 50. We have more housing units in Dobbs Ferry. I just feel that, you know, quite honestly, any house on probably Belden, Bellwood, Walgrove, you could probably take a map and just see how many of those homes could actually have that kind of an ADU unit added to their home and not have to have an existing parking. Do you think that I would like to see the yard, my next door neighbor's yard, turn into a parking lot so that they could have an ADU in their yard, so that they could build a driveway? And what that does is it puts me in a position as a homeowner. For 40 years, I've lived in Dobbs Ferry, maintained my taxes, and maintain the fact that I want to stay in a single family house. Call me selfish, but that was my American dream ever since I watched Leave It to Beaver. That was the goal in my life. And I do not want my golden years to be used in having somebody having to live in the back of my house that I have no regulation on. What happens if you rent to somebody and it turns out you got to worry about their sink. You got to worry about their domestic violence problems. You know, it's like, that is not the type of living that I have envisioned in my mind.
Perhaps you misunderstood what's here. No one's asking you to put an ADU on your property.
I know nobody's
There's no
asking.
zoning, there's no zoning change. You can't build out more of your impervious surface
But do you
on your
understand?
property.
But-
That's the same. If someone wants to build a parking lot and they have impervious surface remaining, coverage remaining on their property, they can do that, whether you like it or not. And this doesn't change that. It's the same calculation.
Right. So, but the fact that Pat wants the excessive dissimilar to your units, I think that that's wrong. I mean, I think that, who spoke? Was that Mr. Pano?
Patino, pretty close.
Yes. You can recall how upset I was because somebody wanted to put a staircase up the side of the house next to mine. What that does is it puts me in a position where I have to fight with my neighbors in order to protect my property value. And it took a long time for me and my neighbor to get back on speaking terms over that. I just really feel that this is not good, that we cannot maintain one family base homes in this community. I think that the taxes are killing us all. And I think that I'd like to propose that for every residence that lived in Dobbs Ferry for 10 years, they get a 10% deduction on their school taxes for the next till,
Okay, thank you. That's not relevant to the ADU
But I'm
conversation.
just saying,
Thanks for your comments.
this whole thing about people saying we're being taxed out, was the C-Corp process completed for this document?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, it was. Was it circulated?
Yes, it was included in the packages and it's before the board, and any determination of significance will have to be made if the board was to proceed to adopting this law.
Okay. Well, I'm going to just end my comments there. Even if you pass it, I can still put in my public hearing. I'm actually calling you from my vacation where I'm sure a lot of other people are, the first week in June. But I really don't think, I know I don't have to put an ADU on my house, but there's nothing stopping my,
Next. How many more do we have?
2 more.
I'm going to stop it at 2 more, I think, because we've been doing this for about an hour. And if we feel like we can't, everybody's still welcome to submit their comments in writing.
Yeah. Laura.
Good evening, Mayor and Board. This is Maud Gerasi, 177 Ashford Avenue. I am calling in support of the efforts of the Affordable Housing Committee with this ADU law. From the very beginning that this process began years ago, the purpose of this has always been to provide housing for our seniors, our returning students. It is something that I think there has been very carefully reviewed. A lot of the concerns that many of our residents have shared with us today, everyone in this room have an answer for it because a lot of these concerns were taken in consideration. I know that the concerns are legit, and I will think that everyone's point expressed in this meeting will be taken in consideration moving forward. But I truly believe that we will now find solutions to some of the problems that we have without taking actions of this kind. There is a serious problem, not only in Dobbs Ferry, but as a whole in Westchester County, and we are just putting our little grain of salt to try to resolve it. The same way that it has worked in other municipalities, it could work for us. So I don't want to take this approach in a way where we are not being open-minded, but also I don't want the residents that they are not in favor of it to think that their concerns are being overlooked. So I want to make sure that I support it, but also that I value and take in consideration some of the concerns that they have been expressed. The 800 square feet, I think, is quite reasonable. And I don't think that there are reasons of concerns whether we are going to have a significant problem, as well as the limit of the 50. As Patty shared before, there is already a significant number of ADU units that they are not in compliance in the village. And I think that this will give an opportunity to the building department to actually have a lot of these be in compliance. So I think it's a positive move, and I am in full support of it.
Thank you. And the last one.
Hello, it's Steve Tilley at 87 Ogden Park.
Hey, Steve, we hear you.
Okay, 3 points. I think we did the first accessory apartment in Hastings, and over the years, Hastings has not turned into, a real problem. It's such a comparable village, and the world has not come to an end there, and it won't come to an end in Dobbs Ferry. Secondly, Sonia, I associate myself completely with Sonia's points about the fact that this supports the slow and careful development of existing buildings. And I think to that effect, any concerns about design and staircases next to people's property lines, I clearly heard about that originally from Vicky, and I understand those kinds of concerns. I think that there are architectural strategies and I hate to mention the word guidelines, but there are examples of better ways of adding to buildings that don't fatten them up and make them look ugly. And I think those things could be incorporated or added to or provided around the edges of the legislation so that people have samples to look at as how to add on and how to do these kinds of accessory units carefully in a contextual way. So thanks very much. I support this completely.
Thank you, Steve. So I just want to get a consensus of the board, how we feel about the law in general. God bless you, whoever sneezed. And if we are okay with going forward without the changes as suggested by Westchester County, and or any other changes within the law that we want to make. So let's just go around and get a consensus. So Mike, how do you feel about it?
Let's see, I'm in support. However, I find there's two issues that I would like to raise. One of which was raised earlier. The first, I agree with the county on removing the limit of 50. I think that I don't think there's quite a bit of evidence about the crisis of housing that exists in Dobbs Ferry, in Westchester County, in our part of Westchester County. And I think the big part of that solution is adding significant number of units to communities like ours. 50 is not going to be enough. That number is much higher than that. So I believe we should remove that. The second issue that I think is very important is the legalization of existing ADUs, some of which have been in place for decades, which don't affect traffic issues or don't affect, there's no more burden than there already is or has been for many years. And I think most importantly is bringing those ADUs to sort of 2022 life safety standards. And I want to use an example which happened last year after a significant storm, hurricane. There were a number of people lost their lives not far from where we are because of units that were illegal. And I think that taking that into consideration, typically disasters happen in places that aren't regulated. And so I think having our building department help legalize those without punishing the owners should be a very important part of this. And for that reason, I'd be in support of modifying the table at the end of the document. I believe it's A1 to include the MDR 1 district. In that way, I think we would probably get a significant number of ADUs, and that might push us. Part of the reason I'm in favor of increasing the 50, I think it would push us beyond the 50, over the course of some time. So I'm in support of this, but I would like to make those changes because I think we should take this a little bit further than we are.
Shari, what do you feel? How do you feel?
Thank you. I agree with almost everything Michael just said. I think that has been a lot of conjecture and fear about what could be, what might happen, whether the schools are going to be overrun or there's not going to be more parking, or and I think that Rob Lane, when he spoke at the beginning, showed that just wasn't the case anywhere else. So I don't think it's going to be the case here. I think that ADUs are alternative housing that happens to be more affordable, but it doesn't really address the affordable housing crisis that exists. But it is a step in the right direction, especially in a place like Dobbs Ferry, where the housing market is just through the roof. And I moved here 27 years ago for the schools, and I thought the house was expensive then. And, it was nothing, but, for people who are at a point where they might think to move here, if they can move with their mother or with their in-laws who can help with the kids, this would make Dobbs Ferry open to more people. I also agree that we already have ADUs, so this isn't anything new, and it does concern me because I have been working in my real life with issues just like Michael pointed out, where there were people who were harmed or lost their lives or lost everything they had, and they were living in something that was not legal or standard or whatever you want to. So I think it would be very important to try to make the people who are already living in an ADU safe. And it would give us the opportunity to do that without causing any fear. And I also think that what we want to do is make this a process that people don't have to jump through any more hoops than anybody else does. There's already a lot of hoops that homeowners have to jump through in Dobbs Ferry. So whatever permits would apply to anything else should apply to this, but I don't think that there's anything so specific about this that would require anything additional than if I wanted to put an addition on my house for a den. So I'm
Sherry,
in
just so
favor
I'm-
of this, but I think it could
So
go
clear,
further.
Shari, are you in favor of removing the 50 unit?
Yeah, I am. I don't think that's necessary. I think we all put that in initially, if I remember all the conversation. There was a lot of what if there's too many, what if there's too many? I don't know where the 50 exactly came from, but to me, it's an artificial number that was put in just to make people who are afraid of it feel more comfortable. But if there's 51, I don't think that's any different than if there's 49, but according to Rob Lane, there'll probably only be about 18 or 20. So I don't think it's that necessary. I think it would complicate things later on.
Larry, how do you feel?
So I support the concept of ADUs. I disagree with an open, uncapped limit. I wouldn't have a problem with something in between, as one of the speakers suggested, to allow the board the ability to raise the cap without necessarily having to do, and I suppose I would have to look to council, whether we could put in there the ability for the board in the future to raise the cap if it was deemed prudent to do so.
You could,
Isn't it a zoning change? So doesn't it always require local law?
yes, you can only revise a local law by a local law. If you removed the 50 from the code, you could adopt that as a resolution, as an action for a particular period of time. As a board, you're entitled to do that. You're going to pass this local law, but then you remove the 50, and then you can take action by resolution to suggest that after the initial 50, then there could be another discussion to see.
Then I could leave it to the drafting to figure out how we would do it. I'm not opposed to eventually having more than 50. I don't see that as a hard cap. I just think starting in a way that is, more balanced would make sense. I agree about the MDR one. I don't see a reason why, given the character of the village, that we wouldn't allow some additional units in those areas. And in particular, I agree with the issue of making sure that people are safe in these auxiliary units that already exist.
Just so my math skills, Lorelei, so if we were not, the county says not to do a limit of, and if we decide to do a limit of 50, I need to have 6 people vote yes. Is that correct?
No, you're
Five
yeah.
people.
One above.
Told you I wasn't good at
Your
math.
quorum plus 1. And that would be a quorum of those in attendance.
Got it. Okay, Donna?
Okay, I am the liaison to the task force, and we have been working on this for quite some time. We've been working with Valerie and Laura Lee and Hastings and Irvington on it. So we have done some thorough researching of a lot of the questions that have been brought up. First of all, the MDR one, I do agree that has to be addressed, and the illegal apartments in that area does need to be addressed. I just don't know if that should be incorporated in with this ADU bill, because I think that changes the whole scope of the bill, and I don't want to start from square one again. So I think that should be looked at, but I don't think it should be part of this bill. The 50 cap, I understand the need to want to do more at some point, absolutely. But I mean, regardless, there are people in this community who have concerns. This is something new for Dobbs Ferry. And I think that having the 50 cap, even though we don't think we'll even reach that, I think that might help some of those residents who are a little leery of this bill. And should we reach the 50 and everything is going fine and wonderful, then we can always raise it. So as far as this, I am in favor of doing it through a special permit for a number of reasons. One, it doesn't shorten the period of time for people to apply for this, but it does put a little layer of transparency on it. So people will know if the neighbor is putting in an ADU. If you do it without the special permit, it goes through the building department and people in the neighborhood may not necessarily know unless it becomes an addition to the house, then that automatically goes to the planning board. But if somebody's changing a basement or an apartment, I think the neighbors have a right to, if there are issues in the neighborhood, to raise it to the planning board. Again, reasonable issues, because the planning board has the right to rule on that. And I do think that's because this is new in the village, that we do need to have, we do have to take residents' concerns about this into consideration. I think that's one way of doing it. I also believe that our planning board is very good at this kind of work. They know what they're doing. And, you know, I do trust them to do what's right when this comes before them. And so, yes, I am totally in favor of the law as it is written. And that's it.
Nicole?
I'm in favor of ADUs, but I am not in favor of expanding it to 50. I mean, beyond 50, I think 50 in and of itself is a lot, and we should be more restrictive in the beginning. And if it's working well and there's a need for more, we should do that. It doesn't sound like there's going, like if we are the same as Hastings and Irvington or similar, it sounds like there's not going to be a need. I am not in favor of expanding ADUs to the MDR1 at all. I agree that there are probably a lot of illegal house apartments and multifamily houses in the MDR1. And I've talked to the building department about other ways to address that. You know, making maybe in some zones 3-family houses where there's only 2 families permitted now, since we know that there are 3 apartments going on in those houses. But that's a conversation, I think, for a different day and a different law and solution. I also have some issues with, I'm okay with it being by special permit. I think people knowing what's going on in their neighborhood, but if you read the law as it's drafted, I had some questions because the first section 300-39.1, it talks about the rental being, I don't have it in front of me, I just took notes, but it talked about the rental being the established small rental dwelling units as accessory to single family dwellings. And my understanding was that we were having either unit could be the rental unit. So I don't know if A and B in that section should be limited to small rental dwelling units or rather than small dwelling units. And it's clear that the rental could be either, which I think is clear in the law, but that seems a conflict to me. And then in the next section, I think if we're doing it by special permit, then it's fine. But if you're not doing it by special permit, then under section 300-39.2, the zoning, the language is limiting the zoning board's ability to expand it. Sorry. It says a maximum of 50 validly issued accessory dwelling unit special permits shall be permitted village-wide. The limit on the number of special permits may not be varied by the zoning board of appeals, but if the board goes with the county, and I don't know how anyone else other than Donna feels about it, and it's not by special permit, I would think we'd still want the zoning board not to have authority to expand it beyond 50. And then if you look at section D in 300-39.2, you know, we have the limit of 800 square feet, and this says unless in the opinion of the planning board, a greater or lesser amount of floor area is warranted. I don't have any problem giving the planning board discretion. I think that they're, the experts, and that's why we have a planning board, but I don't know if we as a board want to consider, but no bigger than, 1,100 or 1,200 or something, rather than it could just be whatever, because that's really not the point of the accessory dwelling unit, isn't to have a 2,500 square foot with a 1,500 or 1,800 square foot accessory dwelling unit. And I think that would alter, especially if we're going to allow new buildings to be an accessory dwelling unit versus converting a garage or an addition on top of a garage or a basement or, a shed. So I would want to reconsider that. And in section F, it says no additional parking is required for an ADU. I think that's contrary to the intention of what we want. Is if our code requires more parking for that house because they're adding an ADU, then that should be required. And I think this would be in contradiction to other parts of our law, and we should clarify that and fix it. I hear what Patty's saying about section H in that section 300-39.2 about adversely affect the character of the neighborhood. It's a very subjective qualification, but it does require the board to consider, not us board, whoever it's before the planning board, to consider the residential guidelines and design guidelines, which I think would accommodate for that too. So if it's too much ambiguity, and I'll leave it to the lawyer to tell us if there is with that language or not. We don't want to make it harder for people or easier for people to come in and oppose it with, you're going to paint it, yellow and all the houses on the street or brown or whatever, so we should give some consideration to that. But overall, I think that the goal of having accessory dwelling units to allow, our elderly population and our younger generations to stay in what really is a high tax community. And I encourage anyone who is upset with their taxes to go petition the school board, because that's where most of your taxes go. But so I think with those qualifications, I would be okay with it, or considerations.
Okay, so I'm in favor of the law as well. I would not expand it to the MDR zone. And at this point in time, I think we should keep the cap. It is something new, and I do think the residents would feel better if we kept the cap initially and see how that goes. I have no issue with the special permit process. I think we should do that as well, and I think it just lends the planning board gives the planning board the ability to properly evaluate the application, and I have no problem with the character of the neighborhood characterization as well. So I trust the planning board to review it. I know, Patty did mention that maybe some basements would be 1,000 feet or 1,100 feet. So, I would want to give the planning board that authority and the ability in those situations, maybe to do that if they feel that it was appropriate. So.
Can I just ask something? Is it appropriate that if the ADU is already existing and it is bigger than the 800 square feet, that it's grandfathered in, or that if it's already part of the house? So like if it's your basement and it's an ADU, you're not building another structure that's going to take up room, but it's already inside your house. So is that different than if I decide to build a structure in my backyard? You know what I mean?
I guess that's a legal question.
Yeah,
What
Laura Lee,
happens
do
to
we
illegal
grandfather those in,
ADUs?
Laura Lee?
The grandfathering is accommodated already in the code by the planning board, who can consider increasing the size depending on the specific circumstances. So shouldn't be a blanket grandfathering. It should be the application and then the planning board to consider where the walls are, where the partitions are existing, so we're legalizing something that exists, and they have the ability to take that into consideration in applying the special permit. Now, I don't know whether you want to put a cap. That was a suggestion on how far they can expand it, or if you want to consider adding some more criteria to that.
Or if it's that for new construction, it would never be more than 800. And I'm
Yeah,
not saying I'm in favor of that, but that's what we should talk about.
I think that, there's a few other things that parts of the code. So accessory buildings do have footprint limitations, right? So as other parts of the zoning code, I can't put in a 2,000 square foot garage on my 1/4 acre property, just not permitted, and whether it's for cars or for an apartment. So I think the real issue, and I think that the reason this is important to leave in, and I don't think we should put a limit on it, is that if someone comes with an existing garage, it's 962 square feet. The planning board looks at it and says, well, it's a garage that already exists. It's fine as the 960 square foot 2-bedroom or a basement. And I think those are not, there's not a lot of, those aren't gonna be a lot of instances. And I think we should just leave it
Yeah, my
for the
fear,
planning board to, at their discretion. I don't think we're gonna end up with, no one's gonna apply for a new one, go to the planning board for 1,250 square feet. There's no way the planning board's gonna approve that.
and my
Let's do
fear
new
of
construction.
putting like, oh, you can go up to 1,000 is that encourages people to go up to 1,000. So if I think giving it the planning board the discretion of looking at the space that's there, as they said, like the basement that might be 900 square feet or whatever, I think is safer than putting a number limit on it because people might interpret that, oh, I can go up that high.
Right.
I wonder though, if somebody had 1,000 square foot existing, not an illegal ADU, whether they'd be discouraged from going through the process if they thought that it was going to get pared back to 800 square feet.
It's hard to.
Valerie, could you just talk again?
Judges.
And I'm sorry I'm asking you to come up, but you had indicated something, because the county had mentioned the character of the neighborhood, and you had addressed that. Could you just address that again?
Oh, I was just referring to that full section. So that the county's comment just said, we also recommend against using subjective criteria such as impacts to the character of the neighborhood as a means to refuse accessory dwelling unit approval. And so what I was just saying is it's not, the law is not written so that if the planning board just says it's not in character of the neighborhood, it automatically gets refused. But there are other items that they need to look at, specifically dealing with parking, traffic, noise, congestion. But it specifically referred to the cumulative effect of other ADUs in the neighborhood, right? So it's not just one ADU that somebody can say, the planning board can say, oh, it's not in character, we're just going to deny it. I think the concern from the county is that if it's too ambiguous, then you potentially could have planning boards that just start denying accessory dwelling units without real basis. And what I was just emphasizing is that there is a basis put forth in the local law that you're looking at that specifically talks about the cumulative effects.
But there's another very important part to this in that, and it's that the Dobbs Ferry, the architectural review and planning review process includes many instances in the existing code to references to the character of the neighborhood. And so if we were to subject ADUs to a different review criteria than we subject other properties, that would be unreasonable, unfair to those property owners who are not building ADUs, building houses or regular garages. So there's no way we can hold one type of structure to one standard and another to another standard. So I think it's not nuanced. The county's review is not a nuanced review of our existing zoning code plus the ADU code. It's just a sort of boilerplate, right? They don't want to see overly restrictive policies for ADUs, but we've already got those overly restrictive policies for every building in Dobbs Ferry.
Okay. And are we okay with the special permit process and that wording?
I think, again, it's similar kind of boilerplate, right? It's not a nuanced analysis of how our existing code works. And I think that if the process, whether it's by special or not special, is sort of equally onerous, right? And so because you've got to go to all these boards and you don't have to do that in other communities. And so if it were in a community that didn't have that kind of review process for new buildings, then it would be a particularly difficult bar to meet. But I think in this case, it's the same process, whether it's special or not. The only difference is that as trustee, one of the trustees, sorry, maybe multiple people brought it up, but it's that if you have an existing basement and you're converting it, it wouldn't otherwise go to the planning board. It would just be a legalization of the ADU through the building department. So that's the only real difference between special permit and not special permit. I think it's, since we're keeping track of them in this, quantifying the number's fairly low. I don't really see it.
So do you think you have enough, Laura Lee, to craft this with Valerie and what you've heard today, the comments?
I do, and I want to especially thank Trustee Sullivan for pointing out some of the areas that or maybe interpreted as ambiguous, and the removal of the word rental, for example, in B under the intent and purposes. So, you know, we can certainly take a pass at this, clarifying the character of the neighborhood area, making sure that the criteria is directly associated with that review of that one aspect of the public hearing, of the public, I'm sorry, special permit process. So that can easily be done. And if you're going to leave the number 50 in the code, then we don't have to fuss with that. And clearly the zoning board wouldn't be the appropriate place to go to get a variance from that number. It would have to be a return to this board for a revision to the local law, which would subject it to another public hearing.
What was the question before about the supermajority because of the county? Like if we went against the county's recommendations, we needed a supermajority?
Yes, if you were gonna act adverse to those three
Right,
recommendations.
so they recommended no limit and we had 4 people in favor of the limit, so we
have to get
But in the final vote, 5 people would have to vote for it.
okay. I'm just making sure I understand. Okay.
I thought it was 6.
One more than a majority.
Okay, yeah. So, but we're not voting tonight, is the point. We're voting.
No, if you keep the hearing open this evening, you adjourn it to a date certain, that will give Valerie and myself an opportunity to incorporate those revisions that you want to see, the tightening up the language on the criteria for the character of the neighborhood, the inclusion of the exclusion of the word rental in item H. And I'm not sure I have a clear direction on the cap at 50, because of course, if we were to take that out now, then that would be the one criteria that you have accepted as a
I have
recommendation.
only 2 people saying we should remove the cap. That could be wrong. So I have Mike and Shari saying we should remove the cap. Okay.
Let's just go back to the other sort of real substantive difference is the inclusion, and this is a little more the inclusion of additional district. It's from my count, there's 3 trustees and potentially a 4th.
Can I make a suggestion in that
Yeah.
regard? Because what I was gonna say, that I think that this board ought to put the consideration of MDR1 on a future agenda, but that it should be something separate, but that we are committed that we're gonna look at it. And I think it's an important part of the village, and as arduous as it is to go and do this, it's something that we should be doing. I believe that we should be looking at sooner rather than later. But I hear what you're saying about not putting it in this legislation.
Yeah, because then it's just going to delay this.
Yes.
Not if 5 of us are in favor of it.
Well, it
I don't,
wouldn't-
so why would it delay?
No, that has nothing to do with it. Totally.
Yes, I believe that would alter the scope of the secret review at this point.
Okay.
It would create the need to revise an EAF and to look at the impacts in a broader way. But
We would also
that shouldn't
wanna-
stop you from considering that in the future, and it certainly could be something that, we could move to undertake if you
And
want
I
to.
think it's an important thing to look at, but I think we also want to get something done. We want to get this done. This has been discussed according to Patty, for 20 years. So, I mean, I think it's time this could really have a really significant impact on people's lives. It could really help a lot of people in the village, and that's what we want to do. So I think if we could do this, then we could look at the other thing another time.
Here's an alternative suggestion, rather than add the MDR2, which is going to require an additional secret application. What if we were to include a provision that allowed an ADU that has been in place for 5 years or more to be assessed by the planning board outside of the zoning district that we're approving? Is that something that would also require us to
Yes,
do?
it
It would.
And I have the thing is, I think it might be helpful to have an additional discussion on the MDR, because the MDR1 allows for 2-family and 3-family, right? So now we're looking at potentially buildings that are now going from 3-family to 4-family, which is fine, but you could also open it up to allowing for some there's a number of different options under the zoning code that you could consider implementing. And if you wanted to do, some communities do some sort of like an amnesty program for a little period of time once like new zoning is adopted. So there's a couple of different options that this board might want to consider that you might not necessarily have to go through an accessory dwelling use permit process, but just more of another zoning, site plan approval process.
I tried. I said, I'm satisfied.
I mean, I'm just saying that
would
there's-
vote in
there's
favor
some
of
options
it without the
there.
NBR one
the
addition, but I think
members
we
of the
just
board
need
agree
to-
we should pursue it.
Yeah, I think we should just commit to not putting this off and moving to the next thing. I think we should address it
Sooner
now.
rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, this is a continuation of this process.
And keeping in mind that the ADU requirements under the uniform codes are not the same as the requirements for a 3-family, a 2-family. Those requirements, as were testified to during your discussions by your building inspector, increase the cost of legalizing the unit. So
I understand.
I think you would want the health and safety issues to be looked at, and we can certainly approach that
We can bring back some
with a
options.
zoning change potentially, or with an ADU provision that limits it to, say, the 2 families, or, something like that.
Okay, so I'd like to adjourn this to July 12th. Is that enough time for you?
Why
Yeah.
not the next one?
Because I know trustee Sullivan can't make it the next meeting, and I just think everybody should be here for that.
Sorry. My dad's even.
So you have a motion to adjourn to.
So is there a motion? Wait, I make the motion.
Well, I think you made the motion.
I said, do you have a motion? Do you have a motion?
Is there a motion to adjourn this public hearing until July 12th, 2022? Trustee Taylor, second. Trustee Patino, all in favor? That passes unanimously, 6-0. Thank you, everybody, for their input. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I want to give another huge shout out to the affordability task force who's done the yeoman's job on this. So thank you, guys.
And a reminder that you can also still submit comments via email between now and the next meeting.
You have a long way to go.
Public hearings.
Sorry. So public hearing number 2 is a local law regarding open meetings law. I know we spoke about, I have to open the public hearing. So is there a motion to open the public hearing regarding the open meetings law? Trustee Patino, second. Trustee Rosen Asher, all in favor? Meeting is hereby open. I know we had discussed this previously, and we have, I think, a proposed law on this. So Laura Lee, do you want to?
Sure. Recently, legislation was passed adding a new section 103A to open meetings law. And in order to take advantage of this additional ability to participate remotely, you need to exercise the discretion provided in the statute. So what I'm suggesting with this is you include the exercise of that discretion in your code, and then you adopt. If you were to adopt this as law, then at the same time, you would discuss and adopt the rules and procedures for moving forward with permitting remote participation, because there is the term under extraordinary circumstances in the state statute, and they indicate that written procedures must be in place before you can exercise this. This does not inhibit the ability of the board to use the existing remote provisions in open meetings law, that being advance notice of location accessible to the public at every location where a member is participating. Also, as of late this afternoon, the governor has extended the statewide health emergency provisions, which permit Zoom participation by your board members under the executive order. That would supersede this, and it would permit you, under the conditions of that executive order, to continue participating as Trustee Asher is this evening remotely.
For how long?
Another month. So it'd be that it would continue through July 14th. It was set to expire this evening at midnight, and now it has been extended. So this is just another arrow in the quiver. It is a highly complicated procedural provision. It requires a number of things in order to exercise this right, but all of which you will have to meet. But in addition to that, written rules and procedures on what constitutes an extraordinary circumstance. So that's where you are.
Is there any model that we can use to establish these written procedures, as far as you know?
A model? No, I actually have prepared such a document, and I will be circulating it if you would like to take the comments, and if you were to choose to proceed to adopt this at your next meeting, I'll have that document prepared for your discussion and consideration as well.
Okay, well, let's hear, is there anybody from the public in person who would like to talk about this? Okay, is there anybody online? Okay, so is there any trustee that would be against passing such a law?
I think.
Can I just ask a question? Right. So does it have to, what is an extraordinary circumstance?
That's what you're going to establish by written document.
Okay, because I would say, I just want to make a statement as somebody who has worked remotely for 30 years, partially remotely, and worked through the pandemic, obviously, really, there are things that can be gained, obviously, from being in person, but one of the things that's helpful to allow people to participate remotely is they could participate in more things and spend less time driving and worrying about, those kinds of things. So as somebody who's a liaison to several different committees, having the ability to have those committees meet remotely has helped to increase participation for people, especially people with young children who can't necessarily get out at night, or if someone's not feeling well, as I'm not tonight, then not feeling like I have to come in and get everybody sick. But I think the extraordinary circumstance thing would be something that I just think we should always have the option. It also helps people who are differently able to participate more broadly in things, because they don't have to worry about a lot of the issues that come with having to get to a meeting. So I think it would behoove us to make sure that we make it as easy for people to participate in our democracy as they can.
I agree, and we've proven that it works to have people involved remotely, and we have the technology to do it. We'd be foolish not to make it as flexible as possible.
I think extraordinary circumstances and followed by, caregiving responsibilities, health condition. So and then, we have this sort of blanket unexpected factor or event. So like your car breaking down, I don't know, where do we limit? So we're going to have some examples of that. I don't think the term extraordinary circumstances sounds like it's going to be extremely limiting, but then the next part indicates that it's really not much more limiting than the factors that cause us to miss meetings. So I think that I don't think it's as difficult a bar to
Could vacations be thrown in there as well?
Yes.
That will all be drafted in the rules and procedures, and I can assure you they're currently drafted on my desktop as broadly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, the state explicitly says when they give that list that it's not supposed to be exhaustive.
Exhaustive, right. And also I attended Q&A specifically with the Director of Committee on Open Government, and she indicates also that whatever rule and procedure that you come up with does not need to contain that exhaustive list. So I'm drafting it in the way that she has suggested is appropriate, and we'll be bringing it back for your attention. Again, this legislation was resulted from a lot of compromise, and it made nobody happy, as most compromised laws managed to do. It really should have been as simple as the language in the executive orders, but it's procedurally very complicated in that. And for example, in order to exercise this, you must have a physical presence of a quorum together in one location, even if, so I'm not sure how it will impact what you do already, and also the requirement of adding the notice that some members may be participating remotely on your agenda, which you already do. Liz and I have worked out language in the agenda and the notices that clearly already take into consideration this possibility.
So we could put,
You have people with hands up.
Participating remotely, with their hand up.
sorry, Sharon.
No, wasn't Sherry, it was, I thought I saw another hand up, was I?
Mr. Tilly had his hand up.
No.
No?
So if we're okay, Nicole, putting this over to June 30, without you, okay. So you have this ready by the next meeting, June 28th?
I can certainly do that.
Okay, so is there a motion to adjourn this public hearing to June 28th, 2022? Trustee Patino, second trustee Taylor, all in favor? Okay, so 6-0 to 1 absence. Number 3 is a public hearing on local law amending the sidewalk opening code, chapter 265, street openings. Is there a motion to open this public hearing? Trustee Sullivan, second. Trustee Tino, all in favor? Meeting is hereby open. Hearing is open. Who want to speak on that?
I can tell you that it's Stephen, Stephen
Oh, is he?
Trezor.
Okay, put him on.
I worked with Stephen and Jen at their request to include this increased restoration standard. And while we were looking at the code, we also saw some housekeeping items that needed to be taken care of. And we'll also be moving some fees into the master schedule. So if Stephen is here, he can speak.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Stephen.
Hello, how are you? Yeah, this is just to change the code from half-page streets to curb.
On every project or certain projects?
I believe it's 25 feet. If they dig a hole 25 feet wide, they have to go curb to curb. Is that correct, Loyally? Something like that.
A restoration plan may be required in the reasonable discretion of the superintendent or the public works director. And then it says the restoration responsibility. Oh, these are the fees which we're moving.
Because I kind of saw things that if a project was built within the previous, working roadways paved within the previous 5 years, that would be curb to curb. But then I saw working roadways paved more than 5 years prior. It didn't mention that. Maybe I missed it.
It says work in roadways paved more than 5 years prior of single service or excavation only disturbing one lane shall be paved a minimum of 10 feet from the edge of that trench. And it says anything within, multiple.
It does say curb to curb.
Where does it say that?
In the bottom last sentence.
Where? What section?
Which section?
Single or multiple services or excavation within 60 feet of each other shall be paved a minimum of 10 feet outside the excavation.
Yeah, I didn't understand that's what this was doing. I mean, it says 265-2 is excavation and restoration. And it takes out with curb to curb paving if more than 50% of the roadway is disturbed. And then before that, it just says the pavement damage in the course of performing the work shall be restored by the permittee. So that's just what they damaged, or in the discretion of the superintendent, who we don't have. So I don't know how that works.
Yeah, the superintendent is added in there.
Under the asphalt section G on 265-7, the specifications.
That's what I saw.
But that doesn't comport with the earlier section, right?
So I think the intent is for us to have all projects done curb to curb. So is there any way that we can make that crystal clear?
We can, Steve, you want to
Yes.
work on this?
Yes, we'll work on it.
Yeah, and I think that the primary issue is the 265-2 because it's a discretion and not a direct curb to curb. Why make it discretionary?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of references to a superintendent having a say in something, which is fine if we have one, but if we don't have one, like, shouldn't we have language in there, the superintendent or the highest ranking DPW member or something like that?
Because I believe I asked Stephen about that. And Stephen, I believe you and Jen had indicated that since you were acting in that
capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get it. It would default to Stephen, I mean, in practice, but I think there's no reason just not to be clear. It's like the superintendent, or if no superintendent, the next highest ranking DPW member,
Yeah, I
which
don't
would
know
be
why-
Stephen.
I'm sorry, I don't know why we took out with curb paving. I mean, so, all right, so I think the intent is to have curb.
I'm definitely in favor of the law.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, but
Anyone who's
I want to
driven
make
on
sure
Exeter
that
Avenue in
that
the
we,
last 5
the
years.
Con Ed can't come and read something and say, we're not going to do that again.
Right, and for those of us who aren't attorneys, it was a little confusing, so.
Okay, so I'm going to adjourn this to
28.
June 28th as well? Okay.
Yep.
Is there
I
a,
think they were basing it on the standards that Ardsley had in place, and that's why it came to my desk, actually.
I'm happy to work with you, Laura Lee, if you want me to look at it again. I won't be at the meeting, but I'm happy to look at it before you submit
it'll
it.
be better if, yeah, then when Nicole can look at it. She can call in from the party if she has.
I'm not calling it.
So is there a motion to adjourn this public hearing to June 28th, 2022 at 6:30 or thereafter? Trustee Asher. What am I saying? Motion made by trustee Shari Asher, seconded by trustee Patino. All in favor? That passes unanimously, so it's adjourned. Only on the- Okay, now we're up to presentations. You're waiting just to say courtesy of the floor, right?
I misread the whole agenda. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, come up for courtesy of the floor.
It's going to be short, but Bruce Richards, 153 Main Street. I've been working on this for a little over a year now and feel it needs to be returned to the BOT for consideration or reconsideration before the sidewalks get finished and everything's in cement. The newsletter of November 25th, 2020 from the Board of T talked about the board passed introductory local law 7-2020, setting forth a procedure for the designation of loading zones, at which then the police chief would present a proposal to establish up to 4 loading zones in the downtown area along Main and Cedar Streets to alleviate traffic congestion and reduce the hazards caused by double parking delivery trucks. The board seeks comment from residents and businesses about this proposal. When this proposal came out, I looked at the maps and looked at the mayor's newsletter, and it said the zone for Main Street in my area would be in front of 138 Main Street, across from Rick Oven. Parking meters 269 and 270. The address indicated on the published location maps and in the mayor's announcement do not align with meters 270 and 269, but with meters 267 and 268. Only knowing addresses and not meter numbers, I did not join the public discussion when open. Once in place, I met with the last village administrator who said he would get back to it, but said on the videos I showed him, he believed I had amplified them and without any proof otherwise, and then he left. I understand the logic of putting, or the decision to use the location at the corner of Cedar and Main by Sushi Mike's. But this combination in this situation, in this particular location, creates liabilities for the village and presents potential hazards to pedestrians and oncoming traffic. I have lost 2 friends in Dobbs Ferry to pedestrian street fatalities, Paul Golio and Rocky DePalma. So I'm a little sensitive to this issue. We should not wait to see if another accident occurs due to this location decision, given the presented photos. Now I've sent emails to everybody with photos. There's a 10-minute video, 10-second video, just to show the second part, which is the noise levels. And I sent these out earlier today. In the years I have resided at 153 Main, the old library, all 3 security bollards on the curb bump out have been struck down by wide swinging vehicles making their turn from Cedar to Main. And this only heightens this possibility with basically the truck across the street creating another bump out and obscuring visibility. Now, also this allows the truck to, on this current location, delivery truck seem to park, they just back in. but they don't fill the two spaces that have been designated. They fill, they're sitting on the weight line, they're blocking the view of the intersection, and they're away from the curb. Maybe not so much now that the trees are gone, but they're still away from the curb. So now you've created the definition of a bottleneck between my bump out and where these trucks are. Current locations of the truck parkway with the drivers designate, they disregard this stuff. I mean, they'll park anywhere they can find it and they just want to get, this obstruction blocks visibility for northbound oncoming traffic turning right onto Cedar Street. If someone is in the crosswalk, they cannot see them. It also forces buses and emergency vehicles to swing wide into oncoming lane at an intersection that has no stop sign for the traffic transitioning from Cedar to Main. This bottleneck does not improve much on the earlier double parking situation. Oncoming motorists swing wide to avoid buses in an area with a bump out curb on the west side. It also blocks visibility to pedestrians to cross from the east side to the west side of Cedar Street during school pickups, bus pickups from 8 to 9 in the morning and from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. The person has to go halfway out into the street to see around the front end of the truck to even start to engage on that crossing there. Number meters 267 and 269, which is at the intersection of Cedar and Main, are positioned over a full block away from the main service area of Sam's to be where they are trying to make their delivery. For him to make his delivery, he has to lower the gate, fill up his pallet, hand truck, walk it against traffic all the way down that block, make a turn at Oak Street, walk it back up to deliver to Sam's. Where there are curb cuts. If there's not curb cuts, these guys can't access the places there. The curb cut for Brick Oven is directly across the street from 138 Main. That makes sense. Secondarily, oh, that makes sense, yeah.
So just so I'm clear, you're saying that we should have put it on.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing because of the.
You're saying that we should have done it at 138 Main Street?
Yes, sir.
And where is it now, the address?
It's at 146 Main.
Okay.
And that's why I didn't contest it when all your notices said it was 138. I said, okay, it's in the middle of the block where it's serving. Sushi Mike does not get his deliveries at Sushi Mike's. He gets them at 54 Cedar where he has his storage unit. So the units that are being served are Brick Oven, which is about 3 times a week, and Sam's, which is about almost every day.
Okay.
The problem is unnecessary noise. The ACE Indico or whatever it is has a generating unit that produces a decibel level of 90 or above. And according to the unnecessary noise statute of 234-26, section H, blowers and fans, the operation of any blower, power fan, or any internal combustion engine, the operation of which causes noise due to the detonation of operating gases or fluids on the expulsion of air, unless the noise from such blower or fan is muffled and such engine is equipped with properly functioning muffler.
Bruce, we got it.
You got that part? Okay, they're not supposed to be over 65 decibels and this guy's at 90.
Okay, so I understand your issue and we can take a look at how it happened and what we can do to move it to the right.
I'd really appreciate it because now I've got a tenant who's also sent several letters of complaint about the noise level, who's going to be moving out because he can't hold his conferences. Because as I say, this one truck, especially Ace, they're there for 2 hours. Today, after they got done with an hour and a half of delivering, they went over to Frankie's and had pizza. So now they're there for 2 hours and my guy can't have his conferences, but I can't do my work.
I understand. I don't know how it happened. I don't know why it wasn't put where it was. I don't know how this happened, but I'll have someone look at it.
Thank you. I've been working on that for about a year, but I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Okay,
But we're not in.
we're gonna do courtesy at the floor now, I guess.
That cord back.
Hello?
Good evening. Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, Mayor and Board. My name is Patrick Williams, 67 Bel Air Drive. Just a comment. I know I have 3 minutes, so I'll try to rush through this as fast as I possibly could. But just the comment before regarding having your board meetings available remotely, certainly to the board members, I think provides a wonderful opportunity. Also to the members of the community. Personally, I'm at work. I'd love to be in the board room myself. I'm on today again to ask about the status of Bel Air Drive. And before maybe Ms. Ferraro jumps in, I just want to make sure everyone understands that I'm a lifelong village resident. I've lived in my current home over 30 years. And I have the best interests of this town in mind. I've been bringing up the issue of Bel Air Drive for more than a year. The road is unwalkable. Every time it rains, water comes through the roadbed. The water has flooded out my basement. I'd asked for some remedial activity, including sandbags, and thankfully the village was able to provide me with some sandbags. My neighbors are experiencing the same issue. Recently, we've had two more, or I should say one more, sinkhole develop on Porter Place, which is right around the corner. And this particular issue, although it was phoned in and cones were placed, I somewhat insisted that when I called the police department, that they really asked the DPW to come out that night and plate that hole. That hole was 2.5 feet wide by 1.5 feet in length and over 2.5 feet deep. The neighbors down there also are concerned. There's kids that walk through there. The Springhurst bus traverses there. I think the village knows of the problem there. And in fact, at the board meeting, whether it was 2 or 3 ago, thankfully the board approved to have Bel Air Drive study, as well as I think Walgrove study completed, and very thankful for that. I've been in many conversations via email with Ms. Ferraro and other members of the town, as well as I always copy the engineering firm involved. On every email, I ask that if anyone would like to meet with me, whether it's on the street or in the village hall, I'd be happy to do so. I want to make sure people understand the extent of condition there. About a week or so ago, after it rained, as I was coming up my stairs to assess the damage, I saw one of the members of our police department driving by, and he happened to say, "Hey, did you hear about a manhole cover that blew off on the corner of North Drive and Buena Vista?" I said, "No." I said, "But it's right up the road. I'll walk up there with you." And he drove up, and sure enough, manhole cover popped off. This was because hydraulically there's issues with the drainage there. So that cover was put back in place. I understand that the engineering firm is supposedly doing work. I've asked several times via email, could you please update me as to the status of any visual inspections of the corrugated piping, which I believe we know is rotted away from probably the 6 o'clock position up and around to the 3 and 9 o'clock positions. All I get is we're working on it. I've also asked what's the status of any interim repairs. I heard last time that we're sending a contractor up to see what we could do. I haven't heard back as to what can be done.
Okay, Mr. Williams, we're over 4 minutes, so let's have Ms. Ferraro comment on what we have done.
Sure, yes. And I just want to, Mr. Williams, I had an appointment with you scheduled yesterday and you didn't show up. So I was happy to meet with you. I have spoken with you several times. We have had the engineering company come out to the site several times and meet with Stephen Trezza and the engineer. They're trying to, while they're and I explained this to Mr. Williams, while they are simultaneously planning the design of this project. They are working on what can be done in the interim for these urgent matters that are occurring. We expect the design plan to be completed the end of July, beginning of August. And at that time, we have to go out to bid. So in the interim, we are working on a plan. I'm awaiting the proposal from the engineer as to what we can do now while that plan is underway. And I have explained this to Mr. Williams, and I explained to him, I appreciate when he lets me know that there is a sinkhole in the vicinity, because then we can go out and try to address the situation. But this has been a constant conversation between DPW, myself, and the engineer.
Okay, thank you for
I
that update.
appreciate that. Please let me know. I didn't receive an email. I would have been happy to meet with you. My phone number is included on every email I send. Please reach out to me. I will meet at any time. I did not see any appointment for yesterday. Otherwise, I would certainly be there. This is in the best interest of the residents there and the town. So please send me that email again. I'm sorry I missed that.
It came from Margaret Parr. That just
and I
double check. We'll send it again and we'll reschedule something else.
All right,
double
Thank
check. I
you.
will definitely appreciate. So I just have, if I can, should I come back? I have two other subjects.
Excuse me?
I have two other matters. Do you want me to come back?
Come back when? Like now? Today?
Yeah, words. So I had 3 minutes for that issue.
Well,
seems
generally,
like
you
no-
have 3 minutes overall. But go ahead, I'll give you.
Well, we're deciding whether
Go ahead, you
he
have-
can continue. I'll just say, I'm very familiar with this area. We live a block further up the hill and aren't directly affected by it. But for the last 10 years, it's been a deteriorating area that's clearly a significant structural problem underneath the road. And it's something the village is going to have to deal with, and we should be dealing with it before it gets worse.
Okay, Ms. Williams, you used up 4 minutes of the 3 minutes that we allotted you, but certainly if you have two other topics, you can do it in a minute each, 2 minutes, that would be great.
Sure. And thank you, Trustee Taylor, for that. Just question on potholes. What is the process to get potholes filled? And this is not in relation to the area I'm talking about, just in general. What is the process? Is it emailing Ms. Ferraro?
Yes, or calling me, and then I will ask DPW to go out and address the situation.
Okay, so can I just say that there are 10s, 20s, 30s potholes between Broadway, up Oliphant, and on Bel Air Drive? They're too numerous to give you all the addresses. Perhaps the DPW could drive them. They probably drive them multiple times a week and start addressing those. If you would like, I'd be happy to go and circle them with white paint and take photos of all of them for you.
Just,
Please
no,
don't do that.
that's fine. Just if you can email me the streets, and then I will speak to DPW tomorrow.
Okay, okay, no problem.
Thank
The other
you.
is a question, I believe in 2014, 15, there was a study regarding the merger of, I believe, Dobbs Ferry and was it Hastings or Ardsley DPW? Does anybody remember?
Hastings.
Was it Hastings? And whatever transpired there?
You didn't do it.
The board determined that it was not cost effective. I think both communities decided it would not be cost effective.
Okay, I'm glad I'm glad it's very funny. I'm not sure who's laughing. The reason I'm asking is just because of the situation that we're facing with our taxes.
You're absolutely right about when it comes to shared services. And that was one of the things that we looked at, and we're going to continue to look at what we can do to share services. So you're absolutely right. DPW was, maybe we thought it would be a good fit, but because of the buildings and the garages and the quality of the equipment and the age of the equipment, it just did not turn out to be a good fit. But you're absolutely right. I think you're on the right track there with shared services. And I promise you that we will take a closer look at some other avenues of shared services.
Very much appreciated. Thanks. I realize that
Thank you.
Thank.
Okay, is there anybody else? Okay. I'm sorry to keep you waiting so long, but it's now up to you. Presentation.
You have 3
Come on up.
minutes.
But you can separate it in, yeah, it's 20 times 3. There you go.
So if you just give me a second here, I'm gonna load up brief presentation. Terms of broadcasting it up on the screen. Oh, that's where you.
You want to take a bathroom break or a quick break while this is happening? Okay. We'll take a 2-minute break or 5-minute break.
Sorry. No, I just don't like it up in the video. It's so big. Yes. Is it working?
It's like an endless. It's like infinite.
What I can do is I can join the meeting and post the
Post
presentation.
From the agenda, we can do it.
It just disconnected for some reason.
The meeting? Yeah, you're right, it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, because look at how that's not right.
Oh.
It doesn't. Yes, it did.
It's in their packets.
Worst cases, I could just go through.
Yeah.
Slide and kind of indicate what.
It's really,
slide
yeah,
I'm on, if you have it in front of you.
yeah, it's really the projects that they,
You see all the pushback on the flag today? I'm sorry, I see all the pushback on the flag.
I'm not gonna think we're
Painted it out flag day.
I saw,
Yeah.
like, it was funny when I came in this morning,
that's really the,
I always go up Broadway and come down.
We're loading in, it's not gonna be able to.
Yeah, I come down this way
Yeah.
and they had all the like barricades or whatever.
I think YouTube is still live,
It
but
it was like 6:30.
the Zoom is disconnected.
There's no sign. Am I supposed to go left or right of the ship? And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, left it. If somebody's coming around, I'm gonna smash them. So I was like,
And
But
people
it
are
was-
complaining about the school
it
today.
was awkward to go, whatever. So I go around, but then I was kind of like, oh.
I have to remember to put the unity
I know.
thing, that's not just pride, 'cause it's supposed to be. a
I
unity
know.
flag. Melissa,
Yeah.
when they paint the flag, are they putting the unity symbol in too? 'Cause it's supposed to be the unity flag, not just the pride flag, you know?
It has the arrow on the end.
No, it's not just the arrow on the end. There's like a little thing in the,
No, they are not doing that.
there's like a little circle thing in there.
That was not.
That was
on
the one that we
plan.
talked about doing. That's the unity
That's the one
flag.
the one that we sent the picture of did not have that in
Yep.
there.
If you wanted to write one, it includes everybody then, because it includes I don't remember what the word was. Do you remember what the word is? Inter something?
Yeah, on
Intersex,
that.
maybe? It might be intersex.
I'll look, but the sample that we sent that we were going forward with, I mean, it was hard enough. I don't know that they can do a circle. It was hard enough for them to get the straight line.
If you look at it, it's not that complicated for somebody that's in like, they had like a high school student that just went and painted just that part of it.
Sharing. We're back on.
But it's unfortunate that people
We're back on.
complaining about it being painted on Flag Guys. I mean, you'll have people complain about it privately, but like. That was, you know, it's been painted on Saturday, that none of that complaints would have happened, you know?
They have it in front of them.
I think, but it was, the post on Facebook when I saw it had 103 comments. I did not read all the comments, what I said. I look like everything, so
It's like, keep saying like, when is it gonna end? It's like the days, it is just getting worse and worse and worse, man. It's crazy.
I'm working 7 days a week. My associates complain, I'm like, well, at least you have a vacation. And my associate tried to plan a vacation for 10 days, which she just like tried to throw on the calendar, I'm like, whoa, like 10 days, I never thought, it's 2 weeks, like, come on. Something usually people ask for because like they have a honeymoon or, you know, she's from India, so maybe you have a family wedding or something. Anyway, she was gonna come back on October 7th. We have a trial starting in LA on October 11th.
I know. You
No,
said that.
anytime your vacation is hurry. Like, how do you think be away the whole time? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I know, that's the one I showed them. It's not that complicated.
And the other. Yeah. The other ones that they're showing, like with this. Whatever else. It's not colored yellow, it's just white.
Right
Now
over
they
the
added yellow. on it.
It's just a circle. It's not that complicated. It's not like, you know, like a squiggly or. All right, thanks. I did not think that we were supposed to be here. This is the never. I was just telling you, I work every night till midnight. I've been working like 7 days a week.
That is
Not
not
7
the
days
one
until midnight, but a lot. I'm like, that's enough. I only can't come on the 28th because it's my dad's 80th. So I'm like,
Yeah, sure.
That's what.
yeah, who knows? It could be as
Okay, welcome.
Good to go?
Ready to go.
Well, I got here. I was very excited because I thought everybody in the crowd was here to, listen to the Honeywell presentation tonight. But the good news is I'm not here to talk about ADUs. I am here to give you an update.
Who are you?
There you go. I'm here to give you certainly an update of what we have worked on over the last 5 months.
Can you tell us your name really though? We need to know your name.
Oh, sure.
For the record.
So for the record here, Terry Gyrie, I work for Honeywell. I head up Honeywell's public sector team in New York. So we do predominantly energy performance contracting work in public school districts and municipalities. And I lead that group here in New York State. So this evening, what I want to do is I want to give you the history, because I think the last time I presented, there's a few new board members. So I thank you for the opportunity to present here tonight. We did a preliminary audit about July of last year to assess the opportunity here in the village in terms of what type of energy savings we could drive in your facilities in an effort to fund some needed capital work, predominantly in this building. You're probably well aware of the aging infrastructure here. You've got a roof that's well beyond its useful life. You've got mechanical equipment that's beyond its useful life. So we did a preliminary study last June, and we said, you know what? We feel there's an opportunity to find a self-funding path to get that work done. But there's a process in New York State, or the law, that you have to follow an RFP process. So the village had released an RFP in November of last year with the due date in, I think it was mid-December. We responded, and the board passed a formal resolution on December 30th, formally selecting Honeywell to move forward with a comprehensive energy audit. Again, there was no financial commitment. It was certainly on our dime then to move forward and to do all the engineering work to produce hopefully a contract that we believe is a self-funding contract to get this work done, which is what I'm here to talk about tonight. Or if we couldn't, we would have stopped. And again, there wouldn't have been any financial burden on that process on the village. But the good news is we found a path that we believe is just about self-funding, and I'm going to go over some of the details. I do have slides here, and I'm going to ask for your feedback around just what is energy performance contracting, a little bit about Honeywell, but I'd rather get into, the particulars of the job, but I can spend as much time as you want as a brief overview for those that may not have been present last year to understand a little bit about energy performance contracting. I'll spend a few minutes. I got one slide that I think really makes it pretty simple. A little bit about Honeywell. We've been doing energy work for over 42 years. So this is a very mature market. Energy performance contracting started with the federal government back in the mid 1980s. And they really have established the rules that we all play with today in terms of how you guarantee the energy savings. And you can see at the bottom there, we actually have gone through a very aggressive energy program through our own facilities. And we've significantly reduced our own greenhouse gas emissions by over 65% over the last several years. I put this up because I heard a lot of this tonight. Aging infrastructure, drainage issues, cleaning up the park. I mean, this is what we hear from every municipality, right? We don't have unlimited funds to get the needed work done. And so this is one vehicle we believe that you can utilize to get needed capital work done. What is energy performance contracting? I'm going to move to this slide. I think the graphical representation shows it best. If you look at the first pie chart, what you see there in red is what do you spend today on your utilities? You've got gas costs, electric costs, propane costs. Those are your utility costs. What you see in gray, what are your repair costs? We did an extensive, almost 4-year review of your utility cost and your maintenance and repair costs. So we've got a tremendous understanding of what you're spending today and where you're spending it. What we believe, after I review the improvements that we're proposing at this point, we can significantly reduce the red, which is your energy spend, significantly reduce your repair, your maintenance spend. And what you see there in green in that pie chart on the bottom there, those are the savings that will go to pay for the work. The financial vehicle to do the work is called a tax exempt lease. I'll call it a loan. So basically you borrow the money to do the work. The money sits in an escrow account and we draw from that, no different than any capital project that you would do. The annual amount that the village then owes against that tax exempt lease gets offset by the energy savings that we're guaranteeing and some other factors that I'm going to discuss in terms of, I'll call it free money that we have found for the village. Significant, almost $400,000 of free money elsewhere to pay for this work. I'm going to pause. Any questions on just, again, what is energy performance contracting? It's a very mature market, but maybe new to some of you. And before I move on to our findings and our scope of work, I just want to make sure that you've got a general understanding of what energy performance contracting is.
So far, we're with you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So I'm going to move on to an overview of the proposal. And when I say proposal, we have delivered a finished contract to Melissa a few weeks ago, which I believe is in your hands. So I know the document can be overwhelming in size. But bear with me because a lot of that is technical data, probably 50, 60 pages is a list of lighting fixtures, for example. So it's not a 200-page document of T's and C's. I mean, the agreement section is, with the terms and conditions is very reasonable up front. After that, it's very technical. The contract is for $2.4 million. Now, out of that $2.4 million, what you see up in parentheses there, I'm going to go over the found money to help pay for this. One is a $100,000 grant from NYSERDA. NYSERDA is a New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. They've got a Clean Energy Communities program. It's a competitive program, that municipalities can tap into for energy efficiency work. There's a lot of criteria you have to meet. We've met with them quite a bit over the last 5 months. This project has been approved for that grant. So it's a formality. Upon the approval of the contract, the village will get $100,000. It doesn't come to Honeywell. It goes to the village. It helps pay down the cost of that lease. It's paid in 2 increments. They pay $25,000 upon us sending in the application. It actually gets sent in by the village, but we can fill it out for you. There's some technical things there around greenhouse gas emissions reductions. They want, that's one of the big drivers of that program. And I'll speak to that as well. But all of that we can fill out. It's a fairly simple application for the village on your behalf. You submit it to NYSERDA. Boom, they send you a check for $25,000. The $75,000 come when the work is complete. They come and they do an inspection of the work. Then they give the village $75,000. On top of that, Con Edison, you have Con Edison for gas. They've got some lucrative energy efficiency rebate programs that a lot of the measures we are proposing are applicable there. We will tap into that and maximize that. This is a conservative number. So I think if anything, we will grow that rebate number. Those dollars also come to the village, not to Honeywell, to pay down the cost of the job. Process is pretty simple. We do a ton of work in this geography with Con Ed. It's an application. It's then a pre-inspection. They want to see the existing equipment matches what is in the application. And then they do a post-inspection when the work is complete. Everything is turnkey, handled from application to post-inspection by our team. And like I said, that 60 2,905, I believe, is a conservative number. We're looking to grow that. Now, this last one is probably the one I'm the most excited about, because we didn't see this last July. On the electric side, the village is with New York Power Authority. As part of NYPA, you don't contribute in your, if you look at your utility bill, in your home bill. Most utility companies have what's called a systems benefits charge. And that systems benefits charge fuels a rebate pool of money that funds these rebate programs. NYPA doesn't have that. So you, unfortunately, on the electric side, unlike the gas side, where we can tap into rebate programs, you're not eligible for any rebate programs. But what we uncovered, because part of our scope of work is to complete the conversion of your streetlights to LED. You've done a significant amount of work on the conversion to LED, but you haven't done them all. So we had to do a comprehensive audit of every single streetlight, whether it was LED or not, uncover the exact wattage, and we compared it to your existing streetlight registry. The registry is wrong. It's not up to date. You should have been billed quite a bit less for many years. So we've been negotiating and got a commitment from NYPA that we can go back 6 years and get the village a credit to the tune of $220,000 because of the LED work that you did on the street light side, but didn't follow through. It's not an easy process with the proper updating of the streetlight registry with the proper wattages. In some cases, you have to do a post inspection so they can validate, what's been installed and ultimately see it through to the bill being changed. That wasn't done. That's a huge credit, $220,000. It doesn't come in the form of a check up front. It comes in the form of a credit off your street lighting bill. Now, your street lighting bill is about $55,000, $60,000, after the work that we're proposing gets done. So you ultimately will have zero street lighting bill for about 3.5 years moving forward. Tremendous upside. So right off the bat, out of the 2.4 million, we've got close, quick math, I'll call it almost $400,000 to fund that work. That's number one. Now we get into the actual savings that we are guaranteeing that we will drive on an annual basis. It's over $100,000 a year. That again is just the amount that Honeywell is guaranteeing. We're not going to guarantee, although I would like to, and I often push our corporate leadership, 100% of what we calculate. If I calculate something's going to save $100, they're likely going to want to guarantee $90, $95. So the reality is we consistently deliver more savings right than our guarantee. That goes to you. We don't share in that. So when I say I'm guaranteeing savings of 105, I expect the actual savings for the village to be greater than that. And that's why I believe ultimately this is a fully self-funding deal. In terms of the financing, so Honeywell does not finance the deal with their own money. We're not a bank. What we do, like typical fiscal advisors, is we run an RFP process to secure you the lowest cost of money. There's a fairly large group of banks that consistently play in this energy performance contracting market. They dedicate monies that they want to loan for the energy industry. So we started that RFP process and took bids about a week and a half ago. The major players are Bank of America, TD Bank, Webster Bank, Capital One. The bottom line was Bank of America was the low bidder at 3.2% for a 20-year term. The rates ran from about 3.2 to almost 4%. pretty darn good in these times. I expect the Bank of America to be probably the most aggressive because of your great credit rating. You know, some banks participate really in only the best credit rating. Other banks specialize in those that don't have the best credit rating, but obviously they drive a higher interest rate. So I provided a cash flow, and we had a meeting last week to review with Melissa and Jeff and Steve and the rest of the staff to show, okay, you take the 2.4 million, you finance it with Bank of America's low bid rate, you know, which is good through the end of June. That annual amount that the village would owe them is then offset by the rebate dollars coming in, by the guaranteed savings that we are guaranteeing on the utility side. That is in essence, again, the self-funding nature of the deal. In terms of the, I got an acronym there, ECM. ECM stands for Energy Conservation Measures. This is our scope. It's, and we can get into this on the next slide in a little greater detail. And if you have any questions, I'm certainly here on this, you know, particular topic. Want to make sure you're comfortable with the scope. The 12 different measures runs from LED lighting, again, both on the street lighting side, which I talked about, and then within all of the buildings. So it's a comprehensive conversion of all your lighting to LED. In this building, which was the primary driver, you know, when we started, we've got the roof replacement. We've got the replacement of virtually all your mechanical equipment, the boiler plant, just 4 boilers, your rooftop units, which are your AC units, your air handling units inside the building, which are for your heating. They got hot water coils, your hot water pumps, the motors. All the work inside this building is part of that scope of work. The other critical measure is village-wide. We've got the installation of a building automation system. What I mean by that is now we've got think of it as a digital automation system, very similar to a smart thermostat you would have in your home, but obviously a little bit more elaborate because of the type of equipment you have in a commercial type building. You can now schedule the equipment throughout the day, throughout the week. You can change set points at night. You don't have that now in most of your buildings. So over the last 5 months, we did significant data logging, you know, for both what's going on in the evening, for temperatures. Are your light fixtures on? Is equipment running? And validated, you know, and that's how we obviously quantify our savings, because now we know what the baseline is. And you had significant equipment that was running through the night, temperatures, you know, that didn't need to be at, you know, in the winter time, 72, 75, 80 degrees. Obviously, it can be set back at night to save money, but predominantly just because you didn't have the controls in place that could do that work. So a village-wide building automation system is part of our scope of work. It now allows your staff, you know, with the proper username and password, to monitor and control everything from one central location. It could be your laptop right in front of you. It could be your smartphone. Anywhere you've got a web browser, you now have access to the equipment. Again, the right people with the username and password. And we find a lot of customers, they have some staff members that they'll allow to monitor only, and then others that allow to actually make changes in terms of, you know, schedules and set points. But it also allows Honeywell now to have a window into the system. And this is where we can offer the most stringent guarantee methodology that the market offers, which is purely a utility bill comparison. Because now think about it, I've got a manned department 24/7 that will monitor your buildings and keep an eye on critical points of measurement. Is the boiler plant on? What are the temperatures in the space? And if there's something that doesn't line up, with the original design, we can reach out to DPW the next day and figure out, hey, did somebody manually turn something on last night, forgot to put it back under auto control? Let's put that back, right away to ensure, again, that the savings will be met. So it really is not only a big win and benefit for the village, but it allows us to monitor the system and offer the type of guarantee methodology that we're offering. There's other measures village-wide in terms of pipe insulation, bare heating pipes, simple, effective, quick payback measures that help pay for really the measures in this building that have some of the longer paybacks. A roof replacement, you think about even doing a roof in your home, is an energy efficiency measure, but it has a very long payback. So things like pipe insulation, things like building envelope improvements, through many of the buildings, we're taking care of exterior doors, weather stripping, sealing roof wall intersection points, sealing exterior windows, things like that. Those have quick payback. And again, it helps the overall project and to pay for the longer payback items. What I've done here, then I'm just going to pause, is just put together a simple matrix of all the energy conservation measures down the left-hand side. And then you can see the buildings that they play in. Excuse me. And obviously, as I said, Village Hall was the primary, this building was the primary focus from the get-go, and has every single measure in it, trying to address equipment that is significant beyond its useful life. I'll give you one example here. So those savings are not just on the utility side, electric and gas and propane. They're also on the repair bill side. So in this building alone, we looked at with Jeff's help and DJ on his staff, pulling invoices for the last 4 years. And it was no surprise that you've got here significantly increasing repairs year over year on patching the roof, on repairing or making a Band-Aid improvements to keep AC equipment running, to keep the boiler running. You already have some of the hot water pumps are down on the boiler plant. And that will likely only get worse. Like I said, we see a consistent trend of the village spending $20,000, $25,000, now $30,000 a year in just repairs here, not even counting, again, the energy spend to run that equipment. So with that, I'm going to take a pause on the scope of work and certainly answer any questions that you have on any particular scope items.
Go ahead. Sure, questions now?
Well, yeah, I mean, just regarding, I'm going to limit the questions to the scope items. So as you progress, I may have some others, but when we had first looked at this, there was some conversation about having a number of additional alternatives that were sort of beyond sort of looking forward as opposed to towards greater energy saving measures, towards being a kind of a leader in the community, towards sort of embodied carbon and energy usage. And so were there instances for systems or other elements that came up in the review that you did not include here, but that could be considered as alternatives for us, obviously require greater expenditure and would have potentially less payback, so to speak, other than what's maybe the right thing to do?
Sure, good question. So we often get asked now relative to the carbon footprint and the greenhouse gases, which I'll address here shortly. Could you electrify everything? Could you go, typically in a building like this, could you go with heat pumps everywhere? which would take away, like, for example, the boiler plant runs on gas.
Yeah, that's one of my questions, right? I mean, there's legislation in the state about looking towards eliminating gas for these kinds of things.
Sure.
There's communities in our state which have, sort of pledged to eliminate it entirely. I mean, I think of Ithaca, which is a sort of very far out case. But I think this is a part of our conversation about planning for the next 20 years.
No doubt, the state has got a carbon neutral goal, to be carbon neutral by 2050, I believe. So the answer is yes. So we looked at, I mean, the logical thing to get there here from a equipment standpoint would be the use of heat pumps. Heat pumps is an entirely electric piece of equipment that can take care of AC and heating at the same time. The issue here, and it's a heavy cost issue, is twofold. Number one, getting back to NIPA. NIPA is your electric provider. You're not eligible for any of the rebate incentives that are out there that other utility companies have. And in the case of heat pumps, because of the state goals that are in place, they're significant. Like if you were if you were not with NIPA and you were with NYSEG or Orange and Rockland or one of these other other utility companies, the incentives they have to go to heat pumps are significant, and they certainly help the economics. So without that, the cost here is enormous to go to an entire heat pump conversion, because think about it, you got ductwork here. I mean, you got these diffusers up. You've got ductwork throughout the building today, that goes from the rooftop units to the spaces. You've got piping from the boiler plant that goes to coils in these air handling units. All of that would be eliminated. And now you'd have heat pumps that you've got to get to every location in the building. Very, very difficult, that without the use of heavy incentives that are out there in other utilities, I couldn't even spend the time and effort to put that number together for you, because I think it would be an immediate no, and it would take a lot of time and effort. So it's those twofold reasons. I don't have any incentives to dip into, and
any
now,
other
that being said,
opportunities besides the heat pump question, which I think mechanical systems tend to be the big players in energy savings, but there's other things that are surprisingly important.
The only thing we didn't, and it came up at our meeting, we had a meeting here Thursday, with the staff to review everything. So this building, we're touching, I'd say everything except one item, windows. Windows were brought up, that there are some, which I agree, some poor old windows in this particular building. Windows also have a very long payback. So, when we started last year, the goal that I had discussed with the board was, can I find a self-funding path to get a lot of this work done? So I didn't deviate from that. And I came, like I said, darn near close in what I'm guaranteeing, but I'm confident we're going to overdrive the savings. So I think it's going to be self-funding regardless. Windows would only make it worse, but it could be added to the job. I mean, the job does not need to be self-funding per the law. We did a job with Peekskill that they added a few things like that felt, now is the time to do it. If you're going to be in the building, you've got the staff and the manpower to do it. So it's something to consider. We looked at it. Not cheap. Windows are expensive, and you might get into some hazmat issues. I mean, you got to start testing, caulking the envelope around the window. So windows would be the only other thing I think in this building that we did look at that we did not include, because it would have really hurt the self-funding nature of the project. And the heat pumps, again, we do it. It's a good solution. Economically here, it would not. It would be really a heavy number. But that being said, I'm going to show you significant, which is why we got you the $100,000 NYSERDA grant, significant greenhouse gas reductions with this scope of work. So we're going to very high efficiency condensing boilers, quite a bit different than what you have now. So I think we're close to, here you go, here's the environmental impact. You look at the bottom there, we're over 123, metric tons of CO2 reduction with this scope of work. So that was one of the primary criteria of that NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities grant. You had not that they set a firm number, but that was the driver of that program. They want to see significant reduction. They want to see the carbon footprint go down. So again, even though it's not full electrification, significant greenhouse gas reduction with this scope of work. Hope that answered the question or any.
I think so. I mean, we talked about this building again. I don't know if you looked at these types of improvements at other some of the other buildings. Was that part of did that come up at all? Other buildings, like how to address some of these issues in some of the other buildings?
Yeah, and the other buildings that are village owned, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you look at this matrix, so the other measures, we did not look to address, and you didn't have the same types of issues like the major capital improvements in some of the other facilities, like the Embassy Club, for example, fairly state-of-the-art facility. I mean, in good shape. I mean, what are we doing in the other buildings? We're doing lighting in the other buildings. We're doing building envelope, pipe insulation. We're doing building automation. So like I said, every building now has controllers in it that we can not only monitor the equipment, but effectively control it, during the occupied period, and then more importantly, the unoccupied period to drive energy savings. We don't have any mechanical replacements like we have here in the other buildings. Nothing like that was given to us as a priority, but I would tell you nothing really stood out to us because we were in these buildings quite a bit over the last 5 months. Unlike this particular building, and like I said, digging through your repair spend for the last 4 years, I can see where the repairs now are because we had all the repair invoices and they were predominantly here. So that's also a nice validation that the work needed is right in this building. Any other scope related questions?
Just at 9:30, so I just want to remind you that our attention span is, so I'm going to be honest with you, so
No,
let's.
fair enough, fair enough. And
Aaron gets fifth hour,
Yeah,
just so you know.
So if you could just.
Keep that in mind.
Move it along.
I didn't plan for that, but I certainly
not your
really thank
fault.
you for your attention. Ultimately, I'll be honest, we're looking for your support, and what I believe is on the docket is a resolution for approval. Now, the resolution, I believe, does have the caveat that it still needs to be legally approved and vetted out. So with your support this evening, there's still time. The importance of time is this. So with the financing, number one, anytime now under this environment, when you go out for financing, banks are not going to hold their rates. The longest is 30 days. And rates are not trending in the right direction. So the current rate that we have is good through, I think, the first week in July. We've got
How long is the term of the financing?
the 20-year term at 3.2.
I thought it said 3.4, but maybe.
3.2% is the low interest rate from Bank of America. Certainly have the ability to refinance whenever. We've done, this is all we do. This is all I've done for 30 plus years. So the probability of refinancing happens all the time. So it's, as that market improves, that lease doesn't prohibit you from refinancing and taking advantage of a better rate if it happens. And hopefully it happen soon.
So can I just, I know I'm jumping ahead, but you have the schedule of guaranteed savings. So that you're guaranteeing that the savings to us will be greater than, or equal to, or greater than 2.8, right? $2,840,567. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
Sounds about right, over the term,
Right.
correct.
And you break it down by every year, how much the savings would be. And then I just want to ask one other question. And there's a service contract with you guys that we have to pay you in a, right? Is that correct?
Correct, great point. So if I can talk on that, the service piece is what is known in the industry as measurement and verification. So what that is we monitor your utility spend moving forward. We gather your bills. We use the building automation system to keep an eye on the buildings. And we use it to protect obviously the guarantee liability we have. Most of our customers will cancel that service after about 3 years. Because think about it. If I have shown a consistent 3-year history of beating the savings, and I would argue the same, there's not a lot of value in me continuing to gather your bills and tell you, look, we did it again. This is an engineered solution. If there's a mistake, it's going to show itself in year 1. The way our contract reads is then we have the ability to come in on our dime, which is what we'd rather do, and continue to do more energy efficiency work. I don't care if it's long payback work, just to cut that gap. So that's what we would do. If we found a shortfall in year 1, we'll come in and do more energy efficiency work. I may do windows, whatever it takes to get that gap removed. But again, if there's a mistake, it's going to show itself in year 1. So, well, most customers, if they see 2 or 3 years of consistent performance, they'll drop the M&V service. Now, with that, the guarantee goes away. But again, that's what I'm saying. Trust me, this is an engineered solution. Some go maybe 5 years. I always show the worst case scenario. So the cash flow that I had presented to the village shows it for 20 years. Like I said, I'm showing the worst case scenario. I'm showing the guaranteed savings number that we're guaranteeing, not the number you're going to see, which again is likely going to be 10% higher than that, because I'm only guaranteeing about 90% of what we're calculating.
How many of your contracts though actually stay on cost? Like you estimate it's 2.4 million. How many of them go over and how far over do they go?
So it's a fixed cost, no change orders. That's it.
There's a change order clause in there.
Only on change of scope. So if you decided, for example, you wanted to add windows, that's the only condition where that clause comes into play. If I, for example, said, you know what, I underestimated the size of the boilers that I'm proposing, and I sit down, and I've already sat down with, I forget his name from your building permit office, and we've got to provide.
Dan.
What's his name?
Dan Romer.
Dan, yeah. And we've got to provide certain things for some of these measures, boilers being one, proper building load analysis, which we have all of that. If I were to give that to him and he were to say, you got the wrong BTU boilers, and say he's right, and now I've got to buy 4 larger condensing boilers here after the contract signed, and it costs me $100,000, it's on my dime. It's a fixed price. That's one of the primary differences between your traditional capital bid approach. To do this work, you would have had to hire an architect engineer over the last 5 months, and you would have had to pay them to develop public bid documents. So number one, you've already outlaid money. Now you're going out for bid and you get the low bidder. If those documents aren't perfect, that low bidder is likely going to hit you as much as they can for change orders, because your documents weren't perfect and they've got a legitimate beef for change orders. So there's no change orders. That's the price. And we've got all of the incentive now to make sure the equipment works the way it was designed, which under a public bid scenario, they don't. The moment they get paid, they're gone. We have to ensure the boilers need to work the way we're designed. The building automation system is actually changing temperatures at night, or else we're going to be cutting a significant check every year for the term. Huge difference between the traditional public bid approach. And again, this is not as something new. This is an extremely mature market in New York State. It falls under Article 9 of the energy law, which I think was enacted in the late 80s. I would say the municipal side is the last kind of market to get into it heavily right now. I mean, we've been doing work in just about every school in Westchester County. Dobbs Ferry, for example, we did a energy performance contract with Dobbs Ferry about 8-9 years ago. They're looking at a phase 2. You know, as technology changes, customers will then take advantage of it through another EPC. So there is when I get back to the timing and why I'm asking for your support tonight, there's a timing issue just with the interest rate, number one. Number two, there's an issue with the NYSERDA grant. The grant is a competitive grant. It's not like, you know, a Con Ed gas rebate where it's do X, get paid Y. NYSERDA only has a certain pot of money. So they've been asking us, you know, are you moving forward or not? Because they've got other municipalities that are sending in applications. So they will not hold that grant forever. And then you've got the credit that we're in discussions with NYPA on the street lighting side. And we do have a firm commitment from them now. I would hope that they would not change it in the very near future for going back 6 years of credit. That's significant. That didn't come without a decent fight and having all of the data to support it in terms of every single street lighting fixture, knowing exactly what the wattage is, having pictures of all that, and showing them when that work was done. So also kudos on the village for having that data to show, you know, when the work was done. That helped quite a bit. I think from my perspective, the only other thing that I wanted to show was a quick overview of, this is just correlating the environmental impact into things that we can relate to. I wanted to get to a timeline. So this is what I started with from the very beginning, just showing you where we started last year, doing a preliminary assessment, the village issuing an RFP. We were authorized by the board on December 30th to proceed with the comprehensive energy audit. We're asking for your support this evening. The close on the financing is actually a tentative date with Bank of America is set for June 30th. That's typical for banks that like to set a closing date because there's even like a closing on a mortgage, there's documents you got to put in place in preparation of that closing. So right now they are holding their rate and targeting, it's actually not June 29th, it's June 30th. From a construction standpoint, we're looking at roughly a July through March installation schedule. So also fairly quick in terms of the overall amount of work that we're doing. We'd like to get in, obviously through the summertime. Excuse me, we know buildings are occupied, but the biggest bang for the buck here is the heating season. So the ability to get, you know, the building automation work done as quick as we can will significantly help to drive savings in this winter. The way the lease is structured, you don't begin making payments until the work is done. So it's by design. My guarantee starts, the lease starts. So now you've got full protection, you've got my guaranteed savings, and now you're beginning to make payments. The beauty of that is this fiscal year for the village, which I think runs through May, I can drive significant savings this fiscal year without you beginning to make payments until next fiscal year. So there's a little bit of good upside there if you've got, which I'm sure you've got, tight budgets and everything else. We can try to drive as much of the better payback work early in the installation process, like lighting and pipe installation, get that stuff done right away. While we're waiting for the longer items, like the roof, there's a long lead time on roof materials right now, and some of the mechanical equipment. but those are the measures that have the longer payback. So again, the stuff that I can get quicker, lights, building automation, things like that will help drive savings for the village right away.
If there's an increase in cost in the materials and stuff, how does that impact the contract price?
That's a great question. I meant to mention that before. So that's why the timing is so critical. If you look at the contract, I would tell you 2 years ago, I'd be able to put these contracts together and hold pricing for 6 months, even a year in some cases. You can't do that now. The suppliers will literally only guarantee us about 30 days if we push them. So I think our contract is set up that it's good through the end of the month only because of the suppliers. It doesn't mean that it would change. It's just that nobody's giving us firm commitments, and we've got as much leverage as you can possibly think of in terms of our global footprint. So we're leveraging all of the work we have with these suppliers, whether it's Carlisle on roofing or Train on mechanical equipment, Vidaris on boilers. So we have a lot of leverage, and even still, it's tough. So yeah, it's a timing that we would have to revisit pricing if it doesn't follow the schedule. I don't mean that to be any sort of, it's not a pressure tactic, it's just a reality of the market these days. So
back to this-
question.
I'm sorry, just how confident are you that there are not going to be environmental remediation issues that you're going to run into? And what
100%
happens if-
confident. Yeah, we've looked at that. We've done all the testing. So the one area, we've got licensed asbestos certified personnel on staff. So for every measure, we analyze that because again, we want this to be
So if
turnkey.
you did run into remediation, it's on you and not on us.
So the way the contract is written, because there will be some concealed areas, for example, and we just can't take risk for that. If we're running wiring behind a wall, for example, for the building automation system, if it's concealed, then we stop, assess it, and then come back to you and deal with it. I would tell you, we got our eyes on every single measure. And I'm not concerned about wiring because I'll find a different path to take. So wiring is probably a bad example. The one measure that was concerning, we physically tested was the roof. So we took core samples across, the roof, patched up, obviously when we were done, because you get asbestos there quite a bit in the insulation underneath. It was all clean. And we tested a multiple wall penetrations here, because with the AC unit, condensing unit replacements, it's another thing I wanted to mention. The refrigerant now is different. You're probably familiar if you've got, AC at home. The old R22 is gone away. So you can't really reuse the copper tubing that was there for the old refrigerant. So now we have to run, new copper lines. Now they're small, but they're poking through walls that could be suspect. We tested all that. It came up negative. So I would tell you, I'm 99.9% sure that we're fine. It would only be a concealed location. And then we would stop and we would assess it, but there wasn't anything concealed that we didn't have tested, so.
Back to the schedule for a moment, implementation of the work, July through March. Did you have any discussion, the village, for how that would affect various departments? And if so, if there's some plan in place for keeping folks here working while the work is occurring, or if you have something to add to that, like
I do.
Periods where the building will need to be, certain areas will be closed off, and how long that is.
So what we have we have a section in the contract, but I would tell you, we're going to do better than that. It's attachment C. It gives a broad installation schedule by measure. What we do upon the closing on the financing is, and we talked about it last Thursday, we put together a much more detailed schedule by measure. And the purpose of that is then to review it with staff to say, will this work? If it doesn't, we'll modify it. We have a certain amount of second shift figure because we're not asking, the goal is to not ask to evacuate anybody. We feel that we can get this scope done without doing that at all. Even inside this building. I mean, there's like I said, you've got work in the mechanic room and the boilers, you've got obviously rooftop unit work, it's out of the way. We can do roof replacement strategically at times when occupants can be in the building. So that's the goal. But we put together a very detailed schedule and look for feedback. It's not firm. And then what we do during the construction phase, every Friday we deliver a report to the village. It's twofold. One, it's always an update by measure of where we're at. And then it's a 2-week look ahead. So even though we give you at the very beginning a detailed schedule, because things always change, we give you a 2-week look ahead of this is where we're going to be in what buildings. Is it okay, or do we need to modify it? So you'll always have the ability throughout the install period to know what we're doing the next 2 weeks, and you'll have the ability to modify it. We're very flexible with that.
I have a question.
Sure.
I see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 elements involving the embassy. And that we're coming close to the end of a very long public works project there. So, it says building management system upgrades, which I think was part of the scope of that work. I mean, have you looked at the spec for that project so you're not duplicating things that have already been done or are in the process on a punch list being done?
Great question. So there's very little work at the embassy in our scope. They did put in a very good automation system that is staying. So what we're doing is we're integrating to that. It's I believe it's a Schneider Electric system. So it's an open protocol. Good news. Someone spec'd out a good open protocol system, which means our system, which is also can talk to it. That's the whole intent of the control system these days, is to make sure it's not a proprietary system. All that stays. We connect to it so that all of that data can now be back and viewed from one central location. Yep. So there's very little work and costing in that building for us. I think there's building automation and there may be very little lighting as well. Like I said, that building was one that was in very good shape for obvious reasons.
Yeah, well, no, it's a good question because you have pipe insulation, building envelope improvement, and LED.
In that building?
Yeah, that's
Yep.
what.
And if you look at the scope, the pipe insulation again could be very small, but it has great payback. You could have 100 feet of bare hot water pipe, in your home and feel it. That's just wasted heat. So
It might very well be in areas of the building that were not in the scope of the Public Works project, but I just wanted to mention that I know that they did controls upgrade, they did a building management system upgrade.
they did, and that's all staying. Yep. Questions?
I just want to make sure that somebody looked at, like, there's a lot of limitation of liabilities and things are, if we're wrong, like we're making representations about mold and hazardous substances. And if we're wrong, that could, I should make sure we have looked at our reps and warranties and the limitations on liability.
I think that's the reason for the clause of pending legal review. So that has not been done. The best I can tell you at this point is, so we use.
Maybe the resolution pending legal review?
Correct.
Yes,
So I realized that.
I haven't reviewed this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so the best that I can say at this point, just to put a caveat on that is, so we used prior negotiated terms that we worked on with Melissa at City of Peekskill. So I'm not to say that wouldn't be further negotiated. By all means, I would expect you to dig into it at length, but I feel confident it's in a really good spot. And we've never not been able to negotiate a contract ever. So I feel confident that, when you get a chance to look at it, that we can get through that.
Okay. That's helpful.
So how do you feel about moving forward, Larry?
I feel very strongly that I need to spend a little more time with staff before I could vote on this and talk to them about some of the details. I know you had much more detailed conversations with the staff. Staff has done a lot of work that the board hasn't been privy to, but it's a big decision. It's a 20-year decision. It's a multi-million-dollar decision. I'm not comfortable voting on this contract tonight. I think it's very possible to vote on it by the end of the month without a problem. But we need to do some work. I don't know how the rest of the board feels. I feel I need to do some work to be able to vote on it.
Okay, Mike, how do you feel?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I have a similar concern in that there's a lot in here that I didn't review and maybe shouldn't really be reviewing. And I don't know that we've talked internally about how far that's been taken. And it sounds like there's been a lot more other conversations, meetings that you've had with other department heads that may alleviate my concerns, but similar to Trustee Taylor, I'm not sure where we land with that. If there's anything you want to
We've
add.
had, just to add to that, and I agree, it's a lot in the first look. But we have had detailed meetings with DPW staff. So I'd encourage that interaction because I think that would help alleviate concerns because we took direction on whether it was equipment manufacturers that they prefer, pointing out things around lighting that they wanted to make sure that we saw. So, and then we went over at length last week, the final scope, and I think we got their support. We did get their support, but I certainly understand you need to check that box. And I think to be honest with you, the next meeting still works. I think you have a meeting on the 28th.
Yeah.
The key would be, I know I've had some discussions with Melissa about this, is the bank has a targeted close date of June 30th. You could and it would just take some time to spend with them to give them some paperwork. We could work in parallel to target, obviously they can't close on a lease without a approved signed contract. But if I could then ask for your consideration on the 28th, that would give you maybe time to reach out to your staff and further look at the contract yourself. I'm always available to come back or just email questions. That would still keep this timeline completely intact. So
I don't have a problem with a parallel path at all. I mean, I think this is a good idea, but it's a big enough decision. I think we're supposed to be sure.
Agree 100%. Yep.
No, I agree. I think it's a lot of the concerns I had actually you've addressed. And it's a lot less questions or apprehensions now than I did before, at 9 o'clock. So I'm sort of leaning towards this as being the right decision, but I think we just, yeah.
Okay. Donna?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, but again, we didn't get this contract until was it Friday or whatever? So it's a lot to go over, and I would also be more comfortable if we had a little more time to look at it and to discuss it with us, our department heads.
Cool.
Fully understand.
In the interest of brevity, I agree.
It's a new one.
Can I get one yes? No, no.
Shari.
Yeah, I would say, I want to thank you so much for this presentation, as tired as we all are, because I think you really did answer a lot of questions for me personally. But I think moving forward, if there is something this substantial that is being presented to us that has already had extensive conversations internally, then prior to having the presentation, it would have been very helpful if we could have gotten feedback from the department heads with what their feelings were, because it seems like people have just some concerns about the people that are working in the building and the people who do this. And it would have saved us a lot of, in my opinion, time and energy if I could have read some emails from the department heads prior to this, knowing that they were on board or that they gave feedback or that they gave their consent. I think that the incentives that you put forth and the financing and things like that, and even the cost of the supplies, I mean, we're in a situation now post-pandemic or mid-new pandemic where you can't be as certain about pricing, moving forward. And just because someone tells you, and we've all had this happen with any contractors that we've worked for or anything that we want to buy recently, it's just not the same as it was a few years ago. So it would behoove us to to really get everything that we need in the next few days and to make a decision, but to start that paperwork, in my opinion, for the financing, so that if we vote on the 28th and it's a go, things are already in motion. But moving forward, I would just like to have more information going into making a major decision like this, so we don't have to make it at 10 o'clock at night when we're all
Okay, so we're
exhausted.
gonna put, so we'll put this over until June 28th, and, we have our questions answered, and then we can hopefully make the decision like that.
Sure. I appreciate the time tonight. I know it was late, and then Melissa, I'll follow your lead if you need me to come back and work with staff to answer questions, or certainly come back on the 28th as well. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your patience with us.
Thank you. I'm assuming I'm last on the agenda or something.
Oh,
No, we're not.
Oh.
Are we doing the next presentation, or we're just going to the resolution items?
Well, I think
The presentation, she left, so we're gonna have to reschedule that. That was for an app that is being installed. I'll see if maybe she can just send the information and then we can just put it in the mayor's newsletter.
Hopefully she left long ago.
She did, it was Nina.
Good.
I assume that's what it was. Who? Nina Orville.
Correct.
Oh.
No,
Neha.
yeah, Neha, yes. Danik.
I don't know who that is.
All right, so let's move to discussion and resolution of items. So for the number one discussion, I just want everyone to be aware that a workshop is scheduled for June 20th, 2022. At that workshop, we're going to discuss cannabis, historic guidelines, and site plan review. There have been some, with cannabis, there are new board members, there are perhaps new guidelines, and there's certainly some zoning issues that have to be addressed and looked at. So we decided to put it on for further discussion. It'll be a workshop, and we're going to start addressing the issues that people have wanted to address or vote on this issue. I think the historic guidelines have been out there for years, and they haven't moved forward yet. So we've decided now is the time to move forward on that. And the site plan review, I think that's also been around for a number of years, and we're trying to see what we can do to move things forward. So this is going to be a very informative a workshop. You're able to view it as from the public, but you're not able to comment from the public
The public is in person only.
in person.
May I ask a question? Did the Office of Cannabis Management issue the guidelines yet? I know they were supposed to issue them at the beginning of the month.
No, they have not been officially.
I-
They opened it up to public
Yeah,
comment, but they haven't officially.
I think that to make the most out of another meeting about that, we should postpone that component until we have those guidelines, because otherwise we're just going to,
Yeah.
we're going to have the same conversation we had several months ago without new information.
Right, so I was talking to Melissa about that and Laura Lee, and I didn't realize that it hadn't been finalized yet. We could still look at some of the zoning issues if you want to do that in a piecemeal issue, or we can just say, whenever they're done with it, we can put it on and address both zoning and the guidelines. So
Or we could take 10 minutes to talk about the process or some of the decision, some of the milestones that are coming up, like to remind people and ourselves of what's coming up, but not spend, an extended period of time. And maybe substitute a conversation about if people have questions about this performance contract.
Sherry, how do you feel?
I want to have the most productive conversation we could have. However, I don't personally think that the major issue is what the guidelines are from the state, because we already have guidelines for the medical cannabis. So they're not going to be that much different. The issue is, are we opening this up for a vote to reconsider the broader impact and the financial scope of what it would mean to opt in? And I don't know that the state guidelines, whatever, could be helpful. That's not why it was voted down necessarily.
That's incorrect.
That's
That's
I don't think that's
exactly right.
No, I don't think that's, I think that that was something that, let me finish. I think that was a convenient excuse for some people. And I think it would be helpful to have the guidelines from the state, but we had the guidelines for medical dispensaries, which would be a little more stringent, but would not be that much more different. And we have other municipalities and other places that we can turn to see what that is. I think we need to begin a discussion because it seems to me like discussions take a long time. I think it still is worthwhile having a discussion on the 20th, and then we could do a what if scenario and see.
Well, let me be very clear about something, because I voted against it because we didn't have the guidelines. And I don't appreciate you calling that into question.
No. I'm not saying, I wasn't calling out names. I'm just saying that I think that is part of the issue, but I don't think that's the only issue. And so I think if we're going to have a serious conversation about this issue, that's part of it. And we can choose to wait if that's what everybody wants to do. But I don't think that we just want to keep waiting and waiting and waiting, so either we're going to have the discussion and we're going to think about what it means for Dobbs Ferry, and we can look to other places that have decided to opt in and discuss it with them. We could call Jen Metzger and see if she'll come talk to us at that meeting. But I, where I stand, so.
Okay, I think let's keep it on for I think Larry indicated a discussion so that we can remind the community where we are. And maybe we could also highlight some of the zoning issues that may be at risk, question there. Because there may be some questions where people want it or don't want it, so we could address that. So, okay, let's move on to resolutions. We have a resolution for a budgetary transfer.
I think there was a suggestion to perhaps put the Honeywell discussion on that night in light of the lessening of the cannabis topic.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So
You might want to get that straightened out so you can vote on that on the.
Right, that's a good idea. So we can add that. Okay, Melissa will add that.
There was a suggestion. I just, if you're going
It's a
to.
good suggestion.
I do too.
So we'll add
I
it.
do too. I want to just, I'll be brief. We need to keep that discussion, that meeting to a reasonable time period. And we have the historic district guidelines going to take some time. The site plan review is going to take some time. And now we have a critical time, scheduling issue with the Honeywell conversation, which is also going to take a bit of time. And as we just saw, and I think we saw, for months and months, the cannabis conversation is much more time than all those things put together. And so it's not that I don't, everyone knows how I feel about it. But I just want it to be, I don't want it to hijack that meeting and that discussion, which I fear it will. And so I almost feel like it should have its own meeting.
I'd just like to say, if the majority of the board is interested in repealing the law that we passed about opting out and opting in, it's a process to do that. It involves public hearings and other things in addition to the zoning issues. And if Dobbs Ferry is going to switch its option and want to opt in, the sooner we complete that process so that you're at the 1 year mark and you actually have the opportunity to have these cannabis dispensaries apply to be in Dobbs Ferry, that would be the better way. I think if there's draft guidelines, we could probably get some insight if they're going to be significantly changed or not. But I'm just throwing that 2 cents in. I mean, I did vote against it. The guidelines were important to me, understanding that those issues and getting our zoning organized before we opted in was important to me. But I just raised that. I'm not saying it has to be on the 20th, but it probably isn't something that should be kicked down the road too far.
I mean, maybe we just, we give a half hour to each topic and we have 4 topics. I don't want it to just drag on forever. And
I think that's a good way to do it.
Why don't we include it and we'll just limit it to a 30-minute discussion. So we just don't abandon the other issues, which I think are important.
Yes.
And like the mayor said, some of these have been on the agenda for 5-6 years now.
And it'll help us queue up what we need to do to make a decision.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So
Fair
stick with it. We had one more.
Okay, so let's move on to an action item. We have a budgetary transfer. Action item number 2. We have a budgetary transfer to recreation. We have a motion to increase the salary for the budgeted position of superintendent of recreation. Whereas, I'm just going to read the motion. Whereas the recreation personnel services full-time budget shall be increased $21,315 to reflect the change in the annual salary for the superintendent of recreation shall be $140,000. So is there a motion to increase the budget for the full-time superintendent of recreation by $21,315, bringing her salary to $140,000? Is there a motion? Trustee Sullivan, second. Deputy Mayor Cassell, all in favor? Okay, and that passes 6-0. Is there a, Rick, you're waiting a long time.
So he's still on duty though, so.
I don't think this needs much of an explanation or any explanation, to be quite
I think we
honest
know
with you. So this is pretty much, we are just going to enter into a maintenance agreement with Central Square to maintain the equipment, some of the equipment, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so is there a motion to authorize the village administrator to execute and renew the annual maintenance agreement with Central Square for the provision of the record management system used by the Village of Dobbs Ferry Police Department, and be it further resolved that the cost of this maintenance agreement shall not exceed $17,249.73. Trustees Taylor, second. Trustee Patino, all in favor? Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
And the next one is the renewal of the contract with Goosetown, and that, what equipment is that? The radio?
That is maintenance of our radio equipment.
Okay, so is there a motion to authorize the village administrator to execute and renew the annual maintenance agreement with Goosetown Communication for the maintenance of the Dobbs Ferry Police Department communication system at a cost not to exceed $1,309 per month for a total of $15,708. Trustee Patino, second. Trustee Sullivan, all in favor? That passes unanimously.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we had in the workshop, we talked about what the traffic and pedestrian study of Route 9. I think we discussed it. I don't know if it needs further discussion, so I'm just going to make the motion, and then we can decide if that's what we want to do. Is there a motion to authorize the village administrator to authorize a proposal with Sam Schwartz Engineering and Transportation Planning Services to provide traffic and pedestrian assessment of Route 9 in the vicinity of Dobbs Ferry Middle and High School within the village of Dobbs Ferry at a cost not to exceed $8,500? Is there a motion? Trustee Patino, second. Trustee Casal, all in favor? That passes now.
Just want to make a point that Melissa, we were going to be adding a caveat to it, that a guarantee that this work can be done
For
in
the
a proper amount
September
of time.
20th date, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the audit of claims as submitted and recommended by the village treasurer?
I think we need a long explanation from John.
Jeff's still here. Trustee Sullivan, second. Trustee Taylor, all in favor? That passes unanimously. I'm going to waive the trustee liaison reports. Does anybody have announcements to make?
There is the Youth Services Council with some assistance from the rec departments organized an Aqua Fest Day, similar to the, I don't know if they called it the same thing a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, when they had a dunk tank. It'll be on June 23rd from 12 to 2:30 at Gould Park, and it's for grades 6 through 12.
Any other announcements?
And I have Juneteenth celebration at Children's Village on Friday from 1 to 4. I hope to see everybody there. And also the Human Rights and Diversity Committee, just want to remind everyone about the Greenberg Pride celebration on June 25th. And they wrote a little statement. They just said that they're grateful for all the village-wide partnerships, Police Chief Rivera, Kendra Garrison, Superintendent of the Rec Department, Village Administrator Melissa Ferraro, and the DPW. The details are being finalized with all the officials. They're planning a march at 1 p.m. from the flag at Cedar and Main Street down to the waterfront, and festivities will be from 2 to 5. They're also looking for a summer student intern, and their application closes tomorrow. And it's eligible, candidates are eligible for rising 10 to 12th graders who are interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And there was a Greenberg Town Hall tonight at the same time this meeting started. It probably ended 2 hours ago, but I'm sure it's very fabulous.
Just one, congratulations to Gina Bruno of our rec department.
That's
who-
right.
Who gave birth to a beautiful little baby girl.
Anything else?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to remind everybody that early voting for the June primary begins this Saturday. This Saturday and Sunday, both dates, it's 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The schedules of dates and times is up on our village calendar on the website, so everybody could see it there. Just want to remind everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a good reminder.
So in honor of Flag Day, I'd like to take a motion to close tonight's meeting. Is there a motion? Trustee Patino, second trustee Taylor, all in favor. Meeting is hereby closed. Thank you, everybody, for sticking it out.
Run, Jeff, run.
Just
I saw
a-
that.
I have a question for you real quick, if you don't mind.
How many people will watch?
Why is it that the savings double?